Very well, we resume the debate on P24. The debate is on the... Yes, Deputy? Go ahead.
Sir, before we proceeding with the debate, I would like to ask point of clarification from yourself, because it wasn't clear and public approach. We are debating principles. If principles are adopted, scrutiny indicated that it will be called in.
Yes.
When the amendment from Deputy Balash would be debated, and when the follow amendments that might be proposed by the scrutiny would be debated. So can you just please explain the order?
Yes, indeed. The individual articles are, of course, only debated in the event the Assembly approves the principles of the law. On the assumption that the principles are approved, scrutiny has the opportunity to call it in. If indeed the case that scrutiny is calling the matter in, then it must return before the Assembly within, off the top of my head, 3, I think, sittings, possibly 4, but within the next 3 sittings, and scrutiny must specify when it's coming back. It is at that point that the individual articles will be debated, and those will include the amendments lodged by Deputy Balash. So the articles will be debated after scrutiny has had the opportunity to consider the matter and report back to the Assembly. So the articles have not been lost in any form. They are simply now abiding the outcome of scrutiny's deliberations on it, if it is called into scrutiny after the principles have been adopted. I may have taken rather a long time to say that. Hopefully it's reasonably clear, however.
One more quick question. If, when it's coming back, and scrutiny bringing amendments, would the Deputy Balash amendment will be debated first and after scrutiny amendments? Would you please advise the order or not?
The normal way is that amendments are, if there is no other reason to do otherwise, debated in the order that they are proposed. However, obviously, things are taken in order of the articles as and when they appear. So if there is an amendment to Article 1, for example, then that will be debated before the amendments to Article 2 or 3 or whatever it may be. And I use those without specific reference to this piece of proposed legislation, merely in principle. So it'll be taken in the order that it applies to the articles that are seeking to be amended. That will be the normal way. The GREF normally exercises an enormously keen judgment as to the appropriate order in which that happens to make sense of the outcome. Is that all right for you, Deputy?
I think it was very helpful.
Thank you very much. Members, joining us is Mr. Brian Stranding, who has joined the team of ushers for this assembly. So if you would like to welcome him in the usual way. And you'll be seeing much more of him in time to come, and he indeed of members. Thank you very much. We now continue with the debate on the principles of P24. Although I have noted who is next to speak, because the Deputy Bailiff informed me of that, I don't have a note if anyone had put their names out before being subsequently called. So after the next speaker, no one will be called unless they put their light on. Deputy Barbara Ward.
Thank you, sir. Before I present my speech, may I extend my thanks to the Chief Minister for his understanding and his respect following my declaration not to support this proposition. My reasons for rejecting are as follows. The 5% capping of rent increases. One must ask, what happens if the cost of living rises above 5%? Repairs, maintenance and service costs are not capped, which means the landlord absorbs the extra costs, and which will impact on their rental return. Private rental charges have not spiralled, but fallen, in fact, by some 7%. Therefore, I'm unable to find the evidence to the contrary to justify the need to cap rental increases. Secondly, the changes in tenancy contracts. Renewal agreements benefit both the landlord and the tenant, so they know exactly where they stand. This approach has worked very well for years. Many landlords can demonstrate that they do show flexibility for an early exit for a tenant in special circumstances. Landlords are reasonable people and want the best for their tenants. It is alleged that changes are being proposed due to revenge evictions. To date, where's the recent evidence that private landlords have breached and have been fined in the courts to support this claim? I do not condone bad landlords or bad tenants, which can and are dealt with under the existing law and regulations. Therefore, I cannot see the need to make any more changes at this time. Notice periods. I find it inequitable that the notice periods are different. 3 months for landlords and 1 month for a tenant. Notice periods should be balanced and equitable. As I previously stated, landlords are reasonable people and cognizant of people's special circumstances and can and do vary notice periods. I'm extremely concerned that these changes may have an impact on the island's economic stability. The rental sector attracts some 11% towards our economical position. From the 45% of rentals, the private sector provides a large proportion of rentals, some 32%. Any downward trend by these proposed changes may affect the economic percentage, especially if private landlords leave the industry. The downturn will automatically place pressure on other areas to make up the shortfall. What I do find interesting, sir, is that previously the Assembly agreed to hold back some £20 million from our state's grant into the Social Security Fund to help bolster businesses, increase employees' income towards the living wage, to support improvements in Jersey's economical position. So why are we risking countering this? To me, it doesn't make sense without the clear evidence to make these changes. We currently have the necessary laws and enforcement regulations. In my view, sir, may I encourage the Assembly to reject any move to put our economical position at risk and leave well alone in these uncertain, volatile fiscal times. Please may I note that the moves likened to this proposition introduced in other jurisdictions has had adverse effects. For one example, in the Republic of Ireland, it provides a sobering example of unintended consequences. Controls there led to a collapse in the private rental investment market and difficulties to attract landlords back to the sector. Sir, members need to be cognizant of other people's and jurisdictions' mistakes. As to ignore, it may be costly to Jersey in more ways than one. I feel this proposition is a short-sighted gain, which may result in a long-term pain. These proposals may impact tenants as well. Landlords, due to more red tape, may consider exiting the market by either selling or wanting their properties back for family members or themselves. If this happens, tenants will have to find other homes, especially the 3-bedroom homes, which we all agree are in short supply. This market reduction could make rents higher due to the demand. Properties are an owner's asset, whether it be owner-occupied or rental property. More legislation is unnecessary at this time. The Minister considers there's a housing crisis, which is not going to magically disappear overnight, as more family homes are needed. But these proposals could further increase the housing crisis by creating a short supply. Sir, members, overall, landlords do act reasonably by way of notice and management of their properties. These proposals, in my view, interferes and places barriers for the owner to retain their properties back. Due to the proposed hoops and increased bureaucracy being suggested, this cannot be right or fair. Certain members, on these aspects expressed, I cannot support this the principles and proposition at this time. Please may I encourage members to reject also. Thank you very much, members, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Constable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And had I spoken yesterday, I would have begun by thanking the Deputy Bailiff for his clarification as to what we were debating, which is the principles, and that a debate on a favourable debate, a vote in favour of this, simply enables the matter to proceed to a further debate, by which time the scrutiny panel will have completed its work. It is not, therefore, I submit, a time to debate the main thrust of the main thrust of the arguments, but they are to be left for a later date. For those members who do not know, I am a member of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, and I align myself with the comments made by the chair of that panel yesterday evening. She went to great lengths to explain exactly what the panel was doing, that we had commenced our work, there was a great deal more to do, and that we would have our review completed by the next assembly at the beginning of September, by which time we would report it fully. She also mentioned, en passant almost, the fact that our expert witness was the Right Honourable Sir Michael Tomlinson. What perhaps was not emphasised enough was that he is not only a Privy Councillor, but is a King's Counsel, experienced barrister, and he's well acquainted with the scrutiny machinery operating at Westminster. He was at great pains from the outset to explain that some of the matters we were discussing were matters of policy, they were not within the ambit of scrutiny, and that his report would be very much based on identifying what were the options, leaving it to the members to decide how they should vote. Scrutiny is very much on the same page of that argument. This is not a matter where the report will simply say we support the application. We wish to carry out a detailed review of all the points made. Indeed, some panel members may vote against some of those, but that is not for now. But the function of scrutiny is to identify the problems, to better inform the members to make a decision. And I submit that to deny members the opportunity of seeing the scrutiny report is a grave injustice and not something we were elected to do. I think it's fair to say, sir, that recent sittings have not shown the Assembly at their best, and this is an opportunity to show that the Assembly as a whole, notwithstanding different views on principles like this, are able to come together, to respect each other, and to come up with a consensual result. So I conclude by, again, repeating that this debate is not on the detail of the arguments, it is on the principles. Please vote in favour of it to enable scrutiny to complete their work, which will be a major piece of work, well informed, particularly with our expert witness, and then take a vote, and by doing so demonstrate to the public that we are taking their concerns very much on board. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Constable. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I was very pleased to follow the Constable. He gave us a very clear-headed and sober approach to what we're doing in this Assembly today. And I think it's a really important part. And I thank the scrutiny panel, and I congratulate the chair of the scrutiny panel for her speech yesterday, because that is what scrutiny is about. And let's talk carefully today. This debate is on the principles. This is the process where you've been through many, many times in this Assembly. You talk about the principles of a piece of legislation, and then in the second reading, there can be amendments. You debate those amendments, you make your decisions on what you're voting for, that they are agreed or they are not, and then they go to third reading. Just because principles are agreed does not mean legislation will go through. I have an absolute case of that myself. In the last iteration of this Assembly, I brought forward the landlord licensing regulations. They were agreed in principle, and then they lost in the legislative process. So we have a history of making change. But those debates over the definite articles and the detail of them is not for this debate. And it seems to me, sir, that we are slipping into that second debate before we go for the principles. I must talk about a principle that I have. This is a personal thing, and my party colleagues in particular will be probably raising their eyes to the ceiling again when I say this. But we talk about properties, and I talk about homes. Now, I understand that if you own a flat or a house and you have the deeds, whatever ownership is, I have a mortgage, I'm not entirely sure whether I do own it or whether the bank own it, but there we go. You have a property, I get that, it's your property, and you have a right in our law to protect your property. And we all have to agree with that because we all own things. But when you rent a home, you don't own that property, you rent it to form a home. To make a home for yourself or your, as a unit of a couple, as a family, as whatever. And there is a distinction between the two. And you have very little right over that property if you rent. And so you are reliant upon us as an assembly and our laws to give you some protections as much as the property has protections itself. Now, our laws, our rental laws, have not been updated for a number of years, and they are outdated. The detail of how they should be updated is for the second reading. It is not for today. But the principle of will we have that debate is what we are talking about today, sir. And I want to make really clear that knowing, and I think the clarity of what scrutiny are doing is very important for this debate, knowing that if we agree to principles today, it goes away from the Assembly to that scrutiny panel, and I have a great deal of faith in the work of that scrutiny panel, seeing the members of it, and the fact that a lot of work has already happened. We will then have the opportunity to come back, and every single member in this Assembly has the opportunity, and I will go further, sir, and something that is so important for this island, has the duty to stand up in this Assembly and explain why they do or they do not accept the articles as they are or as they are amended. To explain why they do or do not accept them, to understand to explain their understanding, the genuine understanding of the implications of that article or that amendment. That's a duty we have as states members. We need to read every word, we need to understand every word, and then bring that to the Assembly and speak about that. But today it seems that too many people are saying, we won't even get to that debate, I don't want to have that argument, I don't want to do that. I want to just dismiss this from day one. And that's what we cannot do. And another reason we cannot do that is because this Assembly, yes, the government brought a common strategic policy, and yes, this Assembly voted almost unanimously, I believe. I can't remember. I think there were a few dissenters. Good on you, dissenters, by the way. I'm always an encourager of a dissenter. But I voted for that CSP. One of the things in that CSP that we all voted for was to update rental tenancy law. So we said we were going to do it, but as soon as we get to the actual process of undertaking that, at the very first stage of the principles, we seem to have some seem to have changed their principles and now said, oh, no, we don't really want to do that. And so that, to me, is a real concern, because we talk about trust in this Assembly, and somebody who sat behind me yesterday spoke about the trust of this Assembly. Well, how can this Assembly take trust from the people who vote on this island and encourage people to vote when we say we're going to put a strategic policy together that will be agreed across this Assembly, and we're going to really try for each of these things, but as soon as we get to one of them, the very principle of saying, yes, go and do the work as to how this will work, each article, the effect that will have, let scrutiny do their work, come back and speak about it, oh no, we're going to stop it there. That's the end of the democratic process for us on that one. We're not even going to discuss it. That is one of the reasons why we lack trust in this Assembly. That is one of the reasons why people will come and speak to us and will say, you're not changing anything, nothing's happening, you don't even want to talk about it. And that is one of the key reasons why I urge members to support the principles. Because the principle is that we will now move forward and talk about each detail of our rental law and the changes suggested by the deputy. I wrote a speech, and I'm just losing all of my speech because I was drawn into the articles in my speech. That will come later. If we agree these principles, I will stand up and talk about the articles and what I agree with. I will put my beliefs and my views on the line publicly to the people who vote on this island and say, I agree with this, I agree with this, I do not agree with that. I am not going to hide behind, we're not going to even debate this. This is too important. I have children. My son doesn't live here. My daughter rents here. She'd probably get really annoyed at talking about it. Her friends often go to her and say, "Oh, I've got this with my rental accommodation." They have questions. She comes to me. I say to her, obviously, contact Deputy Mezek. I just pass it on. It's great. I often say, contact your mother as well, sir. But I do take on some responsibility, obviously, in being a parent. Mainly around cash, but let's go into that. But these are real problems. Now, we keep getting this point about we want data, but there is qualitative data that is out there, the reality of people's lives. People don't have the time to go and fill in a survey and say, yes, this, and this. However, I will say 249 tenants have already replied to the scrutiny panel. When I was a scrutiny chair, sir, if 249 people replied, I would have been really pleased with that response, that they'd actually taken the time to reply to a survey. Plus 60-something landlords and other organisations have replied. There is a voice there, sir, that needs to be listened to and debated in this chamber. And every individual in this chamber needs to explain to all of those voices what their views are and each of the parts of the law of rental on this island. If we don't do that, sir, we are foregoing our responsibility in this assembly. Now, that might be tiresome for some. Oh, so many words, it will up people's word average. That would be great. So people can, up their time that they're speaking. It's an opportunity for everybody. That's unfair. So I've just there's a little smile there across the assembly. It's always nice to see some smiles in this place. But this is vital that we are not fearful of doing that. That we don't want to avoid doing that. That we don't want to say we are not even going to enter into the debate. And there's a backstop for those who don't want to see any change at all. There is an amendment from Deputy Balash, which almost negates the entire law. I'm surprised, to be quite frank, that it's allowed. But, there we are. That's where we are. And we will have to debate that. So there is an opportunity for you to give support to something that makes significant change to the law, or just not vote for the articles in entirety when they come to. But let's not stop that debate. So I finish, sir, by reminding people, we voted for a CSP to update tenancy law. This is the opportunity to have the wide-ranging debate on that. There's an irony there, sir, that there's been criticism of the, what's it called, the balloting system, can't remember the words, where people, if you get 1,000 votes, you have to reply, sir. Petition system, I can never remember that word. There's been criticism of the petition system, about it not being effective. We want to make it more powerful. Well, what's the point of doing that if at the first point we get a set of principles, we vote against principles and never get into debate over articles that so much time has been spent on? That, sir, is not a congruent position to take for this assembly. And I urge members, and I would urge everybody involved in lobbying in this on any side, what we should have got is lobbying to say, please support the principles, and then clearly explain your beliefs on all of the articles as they come forward. So we know where you stand, people know where you stand, and they know what they're voting for in the next election. That is the key to this. So, sir, I urge members to support the principles. to not be fearful of the coming debate on the articles, and limit speeches, sir, to the principles and not go into a debate over articles that we haven't even seen entirely yet and we don't know if there'll be any more amendments to. So this is important today that we vote for the principles so that we can come back and have a meaningful debate over something that is so important to people across our island. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. So this proposition has the potential for much greater impact than on rental housing only. Our whole island's economy has been and is being affected by insecure and unaffordable accommodation. Today, the States Assembly has the opportunity to start to reverse some of the main concerns affecting our island. I'm going to list major issues affecting the island, which are all connected to high rents and insecure housing. And these are young people leaving. The number of Jersey residents in their 20s and 30s just keeps dropping. Many young people who leave say they cannot afford to live here. People in their 20s who want to move out of the parental home are private renters, and renting in Jersey is insecure and unaffordable for the majority of young people. Next, a lack of essential staff coming to the island. There are difficulties for all businesses in recruiting and retaining staff. This affects the profitability of our economy and the standards that businesses can offer. There is a difficulty in recruiting staff in the education sector, affecting our children's education, well-being and skills development. Top professionals from the UK are not joining our emergency services due to high cost of living and housing. As a scrutiny chair, I get to visit schools, emergency services, other essential services, and one thing I hear every time is that it's impossible to recruit and retain the right staff because the private rental market is expensive and insecure. The struggle to recruit and retain social workers, affecting the experience of children in care and other vulnerable children, in fact, affecting their whole childhood. Large amounts of taxpayers' money paying for the higher cost of agency staff in essential services due to difficulties in staff retainment. Large amounts of taxpayers' money spent on the rental component for low-paid workers claiming income support. The likelihood of an older population with insufficient younger people to support them, creating future well-being concerns and a potential huge gap in revenues. Poverty. After housing costs, 29% of children live in households which are below the relative low income threshold, and that is unacceptable. Families with no disposable income. Statistics Jersey shows a high proportion of people living in private rentals are in rental stress. So that's even less money spent in the local economy. And what goes without saying, really, is the quality of life for people. Does the States Assembly care about the tens of thousands of people in private rentals? Do some States members have any idea what it's like to know that you may no longer have your home in 2 or 3 months' time, or that you may need to find another £200 or £300 per month like magic, or that you may need to move your children miles away from their schools? It seems not. Which leads me to the next point. Low trust in the States Assembly and government. Surveys show that there is not a high opinion of States members. Many people say that we do not focus on the big issues like this one. And finally, low voter turnout. Why vote when your needs are ignored? So everything I've just listed could be improved to a greater or lesser extent by making rentals more secure and more affordable. The proposition before us will do that. To not vote for this is to vote to leave things as they are, and that is, in my view, a dereliction of duty. It is a priority in this government's common strategic policy to provide more affordable homes for islanders and more confidence for the rented sector, as Deputy Jearn pointed out in her speech. It would be surprising, to say the least, if there was not unity amongst ministers to support this proposition, and a poor reflection on the leadership of this government. The Jersey Landlords Association makes a case against this proposition. They are making a case for their members, and that is what they are supposed to do. They are a lobby group. States members are not here to support lobby groups. We listen to them, but we are here to do what's best for the island as a whole. There is overwhelming evidence that high cost and insecure housing is damaging our island in many different ways. I think this is one of the most important propositions to come before us, and I urge members to support the proposition.
Deputy Ayer.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this is not the first occasion that Deputy Mezek has attempted to reform the residential tenancy law. It is a road well trodden. In his proposition P18/2023, the Deputy attempted to bring in rent control measures, including banning rent increases for 3 years of tenancy, requiring a 3 months notice before a rent review, capping the amount that rent may be increased, and also provide for the abolition of so-called no-fault evictions by establishing open-ended tenancies as the default. We are aware of where the Minister's intentions lie. All these suggestions were rejected by the Assembly, and rather bizarrely in my eyes, Part C of P18, to provide the establishment of a rent tribunal, was the only part that was adopted by the slender vote of 22 votes in favour against 22. I was one of those who voted against. Today we're being asked to consider very similar proposals by the Deputy, but on this occasion he is presenting them as the Minister for Housing rather than as a backbencher. So should we accept the principles today, or should we reject them in their entirety for reconsideration? It will be argued that we should accept the principles now and allow the scrutiny panel to review the proposition before debating the articles in greater detail later in the year. And at this point, I must mention that I'm most appreciative of the work the Deputy Balash has done in bringing forward his amendment, which deserves serious consideration when the time comes. But I am of the opinion that there are too many points of concern within these proposals to allow them to progress. The introduction of further restrictions will in all likelihood lead to some landlords exiting the market, and this I'm sure will be perceived as a good thing by the proposer. But who will take on these properties? It will certainly not be landlords buying them because of the extra 3% stamp duty that has now been implemented, and there are a good number of first-time buyer houses coming to the market. I believe that the Minister may be hoping that Andean will pick up some of the slack. We have seen them increase their housing stock quite dramatically over the last few years, including the purchase of 174 homes from the Christian Together in Jersey Housing Trust. This acquisition has received very little attention, even though it was a major investment by Andean. Yesterday, in the Minister's opening speech, he stated that he wanted to prevent rents going up by above inflation. But of course, the first thing that this reformed Jersey government did when they came to power was to bow to their union supporters and raise wages in the civil service by above inflation in 2024. And then they raised all wages by more than inflation in 2025, and they will do the same in 2026. In my eyes, sir, what is good for the goose must be good for the gander. And I mention their union ties because of the number of emails that we've received on this issue, and the majority of them do not request us to support the Minister for Housing. They ask us to either support Reform Jersey or the Unite Union. What we should be doing, sir, is enforcing current laws and the existing protections that are already in place without reviving the Rent Tribunal, which in my eyes is a retrograde step. Whoever gets to be on the Rent Tribunal will have a very onerous task. There will be a huge number of complaints, irrespective of whether they have a case or not. The Rent Tribunal will immediately become the quickest route to trying to reduce anybody's rent. But with what consequences to the housing market? We have seen this approach before, here and in other countries, and it always seems doomed to failure. With such a fragile housing market at this time, I believe that it would be imprudent to bring back the Rent Tribunal, and for that reason, I will not be supporting this proposition today. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I am a member of the EHI scrutiny panel, also a member of Reform Jersey, and the Housing Minister is our party leader. I say this because obviously it put me into a very interesting position being on the scrutiny panel to look at the work that is being brought by the Minister, as well as trying to keep the panel to work to a reasonable timeline so actually the work can be presented at this debate in full. Unfortunately, so as we heard from the chair of the panel, Deputy Jen, and from the Conataba St Mary's, that we received quite a large amount of submissions for this, which meant that there's a huge amount of work to go through to make sure that we are presenting all the information as factually as possible. It is at this point that I mentioned that obviously we have Deputy David Waugh, who's also on that panel, the former Housing Minister, which gave us quite a good bit of balance, I think, in the panel, because I sit one side and the Deputy sits on another side of the political spectrum, and so actually it made us engage in these conversations properly. So, sir, I'm standing here now because we've put in a lot of work as a scrutiny panel in this. We're 12 weeks into the work that we've been doing, and we're so close to finishing off that work to be able to present a report to the Assembly that will present the information that we have heard, the questions, the queries and the concerns raised by Deputy Ayer just then and by Deputy Barbara Ward before. There's part of me that wants to try and rebut all this, but actually I think our report will make the evidence that we have gathered from all sides on this clear for everybody to read what is needed, what isn't needed, where can be approved and what can be done. And so it almost feels like a personal plea in a way that I'm sat there that we did drop-in sessions along the streets. I sat in Portuguese cafes, tried to engage with people. So many bits of evidence that we have read through that I feel that we're really, really close to being able to present a comprehensive report that will make this discussion and the debate on the articles that will come so much more balanced and so much more accurate that I feel that it will be snatched away on misinformation, where actually, sir, if people could agree to the principles, we'll be able to finish our report, present it to the Assembly so that the Assembly can make the informed decision. Amendments can still be brought both by the panel and individual members. That will all be debated. And then when we get to second reading, sir, if people are still unhappy and uncomfortable, they have evidence in front of them that will say, actually, you can either vote in favour of the articles or against the articles, because that's how the process is supposed to work. There has been in the submissions clear evidence that from all sides that there are changes that can be made to the 2011 law. Even if it's a minute thing about data gathering, because we hear about the lack of data being gathered, an amendment to the law may allow us to gather enough data that says in the future that there is more that needs to be done. Our report could say that actually we have all the evidence that we need, that there are changes that need to be done now. But of course, until that is presented to you as the Assembly, then it just sits as conjecture. So I urge members to vote for the principles so that we can finish our reports. We don't waste 12 weeks of work that we have done so far, and so that we can have the informed debate. And so I would just like to make another comment about the independent advisor that we had. Michael Tomlinson not only is a current KC, but he was the Conservative Solicitor General in the House of Commons. Again, an individual who sits on the opposite political spectrum to the minister who was bringing this, these articles to the Assembly. And so reading his report, which is very, very thorough, very, very in-depth, with some really very well-balanced recommendations, again, it would be feeling like a waste of that man's times and efforts to just dismiss it now when we have a CSP commitment that this law should be reviewed. We have, as scrutiny, have done balanced work, and so I believe that work needs to be aired, and if the principles aren't accepted, so that work will just go to waste.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles?
Thank you, sir. I stand to dispel a myth that was expounded by the housing minister, a myth about landlords and landladies selling up as a result of this legislation coming forward. My daughter, sir, is not a myth. If she is indeed a myth, and the housing minister actually knows my daughter, but if she is a myth, sir, I don't have any grandchildren. And I certainly won't be getting the grief that I will after this assembly. But my daughter bought a flat when she returned from qualifying as a midwife. And she bought a flat, sir, to live in. Her circumstances changed and she was then able to rent that flat out. My daughter recently sold this apartment to a first-time buyer, incidentally, because that flat was no longer covering cost. She is an example of the single unit owners all around the island who are a big part of our housing market. She sold that apartment because her insurance had gone up by 30%, her landlord insurance had gone up in a similar fashion, and even to get subcontractors onto site to do the repairs, again, was costing her 40% more than she paid before. She sold up, sir, quite recently, sadly, in a very doldrum market, a very suppressed market, because she had no choice, because her flat was going to become a liability. Now, the minister said that is nothing but a myth, and I have no way of supporting what I'm about to say. It's pure conjecture. But I would say that many landlords are in a similar situation. The very principles within this proposal are the principles that I oppose, because I think if we send the wrong message out to the rental sector and to landlords around the island, most of whom are perfectly reasonable people and doing their very best for their tenants, then, sir, I think we're sending a totally wrong message, and a lot of them will be considering what my daughter has already done. Sir, I oppose the principles of this, and I hope the rest of the chamber does so as well.
Very much, Conrad. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the previous speaker, talking about messages that we are sending out to the population in our community, because one of the things that we know excuse me, is that housing is a real issue for many islanders. For me, this vote on principles is about a vote on us wanting fair protections for both landlords and renters. The question for me that I think we need to answer today is, do we think the legislation is in the right place right now? And can we do better? Do we think the current legislation can be improved? Now, to respond back to Deputy Ayer, I'm very proud that I stand here to represent working people. I am very proud that I stand here to represent the people of St Helier Central, most of whom, I would hazard a guess, are renters. I am also proud to stand here and represent our young people, and I was minded to have a look back at the Life on the Rock publication from the Children's Commissioner, and what young people had to say about the effect of high rent increases and insecurity and instability when they had to move from rental home to rental home. And I really do encourage members to look back at that publication. And actually, that publication's a couple of years old now, and it wouldn't surprise me if those children, as then that were making those comments, will be of voting age next year when the island returns to the polls. And to come back to what people say about confidence in this assembly, what are we saying to those young people that gave their time and effort to respond to the Children's Commissioner, to tell us what life is really like for them on the island, if we then leave the current legislation as it is and say that we don't agree with the principle that we can do better, we can make things better for them? Within my ministerial duties, I work to support people on low incomes, and I think Deputy Catherine Curtis made the point really well about how high rent rises and instability comes at a cost. It not only comes at a cost to those families that face those things, it comes as a cost to us as government. I'm also responsible for the employment legislation and speak to employers, and one thing that employers say to me very often is one of the things that they struggle with is recruitment and retention and the high housing costs that face people that come and live in the island. And I myself have experienced some of that when I returned back to live in the island after a period away. And when you are first newly coming to the island, very often I think most people wouldn't jump straight into purchasing a property. They will go and rent a property, and they will look at our housing market, the protections that are available to them before actually taking the decision to come and live on the island. So to me, dealing with the residential tenancy legislation, being an island that keeps its residential tenancy legislation up to date and fit for purpose, which it currently isn't, is really important as we face our population issues going forward. So I would urge members to support the principles today, to listen to average ordinary islanders and not to reject the emails that we have had in from working people of this island that are asking us to support the principles of the residential tenancy legislation today. And also to take notice of what the work that the scrutiny panel has done as well, so that we can, when we come to the debates on the full legislation and amendments, take a really informed approach, because I do fear members are really very entrenched in their views and aren't listening to the needs of ordinary islanders. But I urge people to accept the principles today. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Connie Tarbison, Peter.
Thank you, sir. I'll be fairly brief, but wish to put forward my position. I certainly don't support bad landlords, and those of you who know my work as constable will know that I have worked on a number of cases to support parishioners and some non-parishioners where they found themselves in a position of a bad landlord and properties that were less than the required standard. And for the avoidance of doubt, I do know the difference between voting for the propositions and later voting for the articles. And I'm certainly not against change. However, I need to see a more flexible approach to the cap that allows for periods of sustained high inflation. Likewise, under the law, the indication is that we will have a regime of one size fits all in respect of leases. Most of the parishioners who contacted me have one house, and they've acquired that house either through inheritance or as a pension in their later years, as they're possibly self-employed or aren't in a job that provides for a pension. And I think that is a special category that should be recognised. I think something like 85% of our landlords have a single house. Like others, I have too many points of concern to support the proposition, and I do not believe that it would necessarily have a positive impact on Jersey's housing crisis. And that is really what I have to say, and I will not be supporting the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And what I'm going to do today is to remind people what the Chief Minister in particular said yesterday. You couldn't get hotter than that in terms of press. And he was asked during question time, will the Chief Minister advise what measures, if any, are being introduced in the incoming months to reverse the continuing trend of more people leaving Jersey than moving to the island, particularly in relation to 20 and 29-year-olds. This is our core electorate. These are the people who will have discussed with people, representatives on the hustings, on the doorstep, what's the biggest problem facing Jersey? And I almost guarantee that most of the people in this room would say it's the high cost of living, kick-started by the high cost of accommodation. That's the reality. And those who deny it suggest we're living in a different world, I think. But what did the Chief Minister say yesterday? He said, "Thank you, sir. One of the greatest challenges facing our island today is ensuring that young people not only see a future for themselves in Jersey, but can afford to build that future here." One of the greatest challenges. It's no time to try and duck that challenge. We've got to face up to it. That's the Chief Minister. The high cost of housing, both to buy and to rent, is a serious concern that directly affects the choices young islanders make about where they live, where they work, sir, and where they raise families. And that, again, absolutely clear as a bell to anyone in this room that that's the issue. And the words there is a serious concern. We've got a serious concern. We must address it. If we are to retain them, the workers, we must take meaningful, sustained action, and that is why this government is delivering real practical measures and solutions to meet the challenge. So we've got a challenge, and we are introducing something. The Chief Minister says to you, I have a housing policy. It's been devised by our Minister. This is, I believe, verging on a sack me or back me principle. We've got a serious problem which we must address. And elsewhere, in the same answer from Deputy Doublé, I believe, yes, the cost of living will be one of the biggest issues facing young islanders. Housing and groceries being, I believe, the two main costs. What is the government doing to address these? And again, the focus is on a serious challenge. Housing and groceries being the two main costs. So we can't duck it. We've got to face it up. And finally, just briefly, I think the biggest impact, this is back to the Chief Minister that is saying this, I think the biggest impact we can make, sir, is on housing, both to buy and to rent, sir. And that is probably at the forefront of our priorities at the moment. There's the Chief Minister. At the head of his priorities are housing prices and food prices. Let's back this Chief Minister and make sure that we address properly this issue on housing.
Thank you very much. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. We have heard clearly from members and from the ruling from the Deputy Bailiff, sir, that we are debating the principles. Today I would like to make a short speech, but I don't think it will be, to pitch why I think we should be supporting them. We heard the principles can be gleaned from the title of the law, the thrust of the amendments from all manner of locations. So, sir, let me be clear as to how I interpret the principles in this instance, and I would appreciate any member who speaks to give me their definition as well, so we know why they vote the way they do, not just how. So these are draft amendments, plural, not one block that we have to take or give, and they can be debated piece by piece, and they are amendments to well-established law. We are therefore, in essence, asking, is the existing residential tenancy law perfect? Is it absolutely perfect? Or so are we sure, without any doubt, that there is no need to change it? I would hope the members agree the law is not perfect. To some members who spoke, the law's pretty good already. That's an entirely valid position to have. It may be one I have that I will air in second reading, should we get there. I think it certainly serves a very good work already. But therefore, voting for the principles is not to signal whether a member supports the Housing Minister, Deputy Mezik's rent stabilisation measures and a rent tribunal and a move to ban multiple fixed-term tenancies. It purely signals that a debate should happen and that there is scope to change the law in some areas. And again, I hope members agree that there is positive change to make to the law, as amongst the headline and controversial items, there are some more benign or even completely supported articles by everyone. These range from ensuring landlords have insurance for their properties, transparency on fees and charges, all the way through to collecting of rental data, the three of which I will touch on later. And to be clear, the changes that we can debate in the articles are not limited to what the Minister has proposed in front of us now. They could also cover amendments brought by scrutiny found from its work. It could be based on what other members wish to bring, who want to use a passage of these draft amendments as a way to change the law itself. That is why, sir, I must stress, if members or stakeholders believe we should vote against the principles, I clearly ask why. Why is the law perfect? And to reiterate this, so members received an email from, on behalf of the Committee of the Jersey Landlords Association, highlighting their comments and ended by urging members to reject the principles. Now, I, for one, as a scrutiny panel member of the EHI panel, think the comprehensive submissions by the JLA have been really useful, actually. However, it confuses me because I asked for a request as to why they believe to reject the principles Monday morning, and I have not had a response because I highlighted the following. The JLA and other stakeholders, I should say, support the need for data collection on the rental market. In fact, to quote the scrutiny transcript, I highlighted, just staying on comments about data, does this mean that the members of the JLA would support legislation to improve data collection for the government? The chair of the JLA, very much so. Also, it's been highlighted that the introduction of specific insurance requirements are acceptable in page 24 of submissions to scrutiny, as were the support for transparency in fees and charges. And I thought this was a very nuanced and sensible position to take. It said, we are supportive of efforts to increase the transparency of fees in lease agreements. This will create more initial work for landlords, but we believe that it would be in the long-term interest of landlords and tenants. A brilliant point of nuance we can debate in the articles, but we have to get there to debate even the most benign of changes. Sir, I've only heard two reasons, or perhaps one, why we should reject the principles. And I actually think they're both valid reasons, but they are also very political reasons why we should vote against it. The first was, in essence, explain that politics is not a purely technical system. It is a conversation, a compromise, and a give and take, and that there is deep frustration that there was no give in making this law, and therefore this is a way to signal that. The second, similar to the first, was mentioned in Deputy Ayer's speech. He suggested that too much of the amendments, too many I should say, because there are many amendments, were fundamentally wrong to warrant moving to the first step. This again I think is very valid political signalling, but I would say in doing so it loses members the opportunity to tweak the law even in those benign or less controversial ways. And I may even sometimes find myself even supporting that political signalling. It is my personal opinion as well that I agree with the frustration about engagement and compromise at the Minister's level of bringing this legislation. I really feel for those who would have liked to see that before, obviously, scrutiny got their hands on it. That would have been far better. But I am a member of the EHI panel, and we haven't finished our work, and I think there is work to be done. So lastly, sir, I would like to close by reminding members that when we debate, in particular, primary legislation, we often group several amendments in one place and then debate each article. After all, we wouldn't want to have many debates lodged on primary legislation all to go for royal assent and come back to us at once. Members will have in their minds and their respective areas of expertise examples of this. One I will draw on would be how successive ministers for the environment amend the Planning and Building 2002 Jersey law. There have been 8 substantive amendments to that, each one wide-ranging. In fact, the last one, debated by the last Assembly, covered 20 amendments over a dozen different areas. These covered anything from conservation areas to handling application of case law, appeals, determining panels, all sorts of minutiae and some other elements. It was done so because we didn't want to have 20 debates on the planning and building law. We wanted one, and members knew that the time to decide pour or contre on each part was in the articles, not the principles. So what's the difference with this legislation? I think the difference is that it has been so heavily politicised, we are no longer debating the detail. It is fair to say a lot of the politicisation may sit with the minister himself, but we are where we are. I will now come out and clearly state I don't see evidence for everything the minister wants. That's my personal view, not a scrutiny view, and I would even contend that some of the changes will negatively impact tenants. However, the time to air that and reject those parts, which I will have no fear in doing, as I have reassured parishioners who I've had nuanced and detailed discussions with, is in second reading. Likewise, the parts of the law I urge members to support, including vital data collection that we lost in previous laws, is also when we will debate that. So, sir, I urge members to support the principles and be ready for thorough debate in second reading.
Thank you very much. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir, and it's a pleasure to follow Deputy Curtis because his analysis of the current situation is so good. And I want to bring it two things I want to say is, first of all, I'm a member of the EHI panel as well. I'm also had wobbled on this topic. It's a shame that Deputy Balash isn't here today because I think he could have swayed my thinking on this. But to come back to Deputy Curtis's point about politicising, I just want to quote a June 29 email which has been forwarded to me. It says, and this is from the Deputy Mezek to his Jersey Reform members. It says, on the 8th of July, I will be proposing a new residential tenancy law in the States Assembly. So this isn't a new residential tenancy law, there's an amendment to the tenancy law. So that's really unhelpful in terms of trying to be straightforward and not mess with the wording. Please, this is why we end up in debates like this. This is why we end up in controversial situations like that, when we have the membership of Reform not being told exactly what the deputy is actually doing. And I just bring that to the attention of the Assembly members here. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I mentioned in my declaration of interest that I will shortly become a landlord. And so I did say to a senior member of a well-known landlords organisation that I would be applying to become a member of their august body. They replied that we only accept good landlords, you know, which I guess was fair enough, but perhaps wasn't the welcome I was hoping for. I think it was tongue-in-cheek. So if we go back in time, there were, as I recall, 3 major issues that generated real anger in the last election. Housing, the hospital, and COVID. Of those, the hospital is on a glide path that suggests it will be built, and I would say weariness has replaced anger. COVID has faded from view. But housing remains as arguably the single biggest issue in the island, and a key component, arguably the key component, in the continuing cost of living pressures. And of course, housing is a complex issue: under occupation, empty homes, quality and safety of housing, and so on. But tenancy arrangements and affordability, the key items in this proposition, are absolutely critical for many people. They may not be the most visible of people. They may not have the time or energy to speak out. They may feel there is no point. But we all know this is a problem, a running sore. Too many people in this island feel insecure in their home and are barely able to afford the roof over their head. There is, in short, a widespread cry of pain from a significant portion of the renting public. That pain is felt in insecurity and cost. There is no control at all on rent increases. There should be. A landlord can end a tenancy without a reason. That is wrong. Going on about a lack of data, I think this is the point. You'd have to be politically not just tone deaf, but entirely deaf, not to hear that cry of pain. As an assembly, I think we have a duty to recognise that plea for help and act on it. The question, of course, is how. The previous government responded to the demand for change with its own plans for reform of the residential tenancy law. And my point is not whether you agreed with those proposals, it is that both the previous government and the current government have recognised the seriousness of the problem and set out to tackle it. It therefore feels to me essential that we at least approve the principles. We know this stuff needs to be debated, and two different governments have made commitments for change. So there's a fundamental point I want to make that sits behind my views on this proposition. It relates to a point that was made to me by some landlords. They said that the proposals are unbalanced. But that is to assume that the current situation is balanced. I don't think that it is. There is, at heart, an inherent inequality in the contractual relationship between tenant and landlord. The tenant can deprive the landlord of an income or damage an investment, but the landlord can deprive the tenant of their home. That is an inequality of outcome, which means the stakes are higher for the tenant. And I do know that landlords are themselves vulnerable to bad tenants. And that is a significant issue, which I do not downplay. And in the UK, I've had non-paying tenants to deal with, so I know what it is like. But that vulnerability is not as great as the vulnerability of someone who stands to lose their home at short notice or who feels compelled to agree to a huge rent rise or put up with bad housing because their only alternative is a rapid countdown to homelessness. We've certainly all heard stories from constituents of people whose notice period is expiring as they desperately search for somewhere to live, putting them in a position of extreme vulnerability when it comes to securing a new tenancy agreement. Tenants are in a position of weakness that can be exploited by unscrupulous or greedy landlords. It is all very well for Deputy Ferry to talk about relying on relationships of trust, but it is naive to say that trust can be relied upon in all cases. The proposed law is a safety net when trust breaks down. It's also true that losing a home because of an unaffordable rent increase, for example, is more than just losing a roof over your head. It may mean losing a place you love. You may be close to amenities on which you depend. You may be embedded in a local community. Your child may be deeply attached to their school. Your life may indeed be organised around that home. So at heart, one of the principles at stake for me is a recognition, as I said in my manifesto, that a house or flat is primarily a home. It can be an investment as well, of course, but our legislation should be built around protecting people in their home. That is why I was proud to bring forward the licensing of private rented dwellings. I'm proud to be the minister who got it over the line, building on work that had, of course, gone before. What of the opposing arguments? We are asked not to interfere in the contractual right of parties to agree to a fixed-term tenancy if they so wish. The problem is that the freedom to enter into a fixed-term tenancy that currently exists is in reality one that in some circumstances is likely to be dictated by a landlord. If you want this property, these are my terms. The choice for the tenant is not a real choice. Private property rights need reasonable limits. Landlords have complained about the asymmetry in these proposals. A tenant can give 1 month's notice, they have to give longer. And we can quibble about those particular time periods, but the principle that a person who is being asked to find a new home should have longer notice periods than a landlord, and that those notice periods should be longer the longer a tenant has lived in a property, does not seem to me to be unreasonable. We've heard about single property landlords with the implication that they fit into a different category and the proposals are perhaps not proportionate to them. But sir, from the point of view of a tenant, there is no difference. The property they rent is still their home. And for this simple reason, I think the same rules should apply to all landlords. The bottom line is that it's all of what a landlord would reasonably want to do is still going to be possible under these amendments to the law. The overarching difference is that they will have to justify what they could previously do without restraint. So, over the last few years, we've seen a very large growth in the private rented sector. In fact, between 2011 and 2021, these figures are from the census, the number of new homes in the island increased by just under 3,000. 3,000 new homes were built in that period. And in that same period, the number of rental properties also increased by around 3,000. In other words, the entire growth of the housing market in that 10-year period was accounted for by a growth in the private rental sector. We have turned property into an asset class. What happened in Jersey was, of course, matched elsewhere. It followed the financial crash, near zero interest rates, the rise of quantitative easing, and the drive to chase investment returns when conventional assets were flatlining. Property became a significant investment opportunity. That's why we had those cash buyers buying 3 or 4 properties in new developments. Now, of course, the private rental sector meets an important social need for people who do not want to buy for a variety of reasons, and not just because they cannot afford to buy. But it seems incontrovertible that the attractiveness in Jersey of property as a tax-free capital investment over the medium to long term, backed up by relatively lax rental controls, has driven up demand, increased house prices, and therefore rents. And that's all notwithstanding the recent correction in the market, which, by the way, still has a long way to go to reach previous levels of affordability. Regulation to deal with those pricing pressures feels important. And of course, one of the hardest points to make when introducing any new form of regulation is why it is necessary when so many landlords are good landlords, as they are, and cannot see why they should have to submit to controls that are designed to deal with a few rogue operators. The Minister had one answer to this, which is that the supposed regulatory burden doesn't amount to much at all. But I would also say I heard the same arguments when I brought the licensing of rented dwellings before this Assembly. The truth is, regulation is necessary because there are bad actors. And I do think that just as with licensing of rented dwellings, there is a degree of exaggeration in the supposed negative impact of these measures. We've heard wolf being cried before. These measures, or at least versions of them, and as I say, we can quibble when we discuss the articles, but versions of these regulations are pretty standard elsewhere. They're not that disruptive, and I suspect most landlords will quickly realise once they're implemented, there isn't much to worry about and just get on with things, as they have following licensing of rented dwellings. I mentioned in my declaration of interest that I have a property in the UK, actually jointly owned with my wife. It's managed by an estate agency. Recently, I received an email circular from the agency on the subject of the UK's changes to rented rights, which are significantly more stringent than the Minister is proposing for Jersey. It said, and I quote, "As it stands, there is nothing in the proposed bill that should concern you as a landlord. The bill is designed to protect both landlords and tenants and provide a level of security that both sides can rely on." Well, quite. That's a tougher set of regulations than are being proposed here. I do have one quibble. In my manifesto, I said I supported the establishment of a rent tribunal, but I was sceptical about rent control measures. And I think the devil is in the detail here, and that is what we will get to when we debate the articles. But I have already told the Minister I am opposed to the 5% cap, which would mean that over time rental income will be less than inflation. But that is a detail for discussion when we get to the articles, not a reason for rejecting the principles. Ultimately, I support the principles because we need to take measures to rebalance the relationship between the value of housing as a home and as an asset class. We need to offer something not just to islanders in the rental sector, but also to essential workers who we expect to come and stay here and work here, and who will rightly expect a well-regulated market as they encounter elsewhere, wherever they have worked. So yes, we can quibble about the detail. And won't that be fun if we get to it? But for now, I think it would be rather shameful if this Assembly rejected even debating the detailed measures that might improve the renting experience for both landlord and tenant. A vote against the principles says to many members of our community, we can't even be bothered to consider your issue any further. What is it people say about why they don't vote? Because it doesn't make any difference. Voting doesn't make a difference. Well, they told us at the last election what they want, where they wanted to see a difference. They're still telling us. Still telling us now. Are we really going to say to these people that we're giving up on attempts to improve their lives? That we do not hear them? What an abdication of responsibility to some of our more vulnerable, marginalised and politically disenfranchised members of our community that would be. On this issue, I support the Minister and I shall be voting for.
Thank you, Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. And I just want to speak very briefly. A lot of the points that I would have made have already been made, but I was struck by Deputy Alex Curtis when he talked about give and take. And I'm listening to this debate with interest because I genuinely am undecided as how to vote, and I probably will make my decision at the end of the debate. I would have preferred this to have been debated in September, after scrutiny had had the proper opportunity to do their work and properly present the results of their consultation and the views of the expert advisor and any amendments that they would like to bring. Would 6 weeks really have made a difference to the Minister? And perhaps the Minister can explain why he wasn't prepared to wait. I'd also like to hear from Council of Ministers members about their views and what the discussions were around the COM table, what engagement was had across the Council of Ministers. I feel the Minister has put the Assembly in a bit of a difficult position. I want to be fair to everybody, tenants and landlords. I'm neither. But we only have half the story upon which to make a decision. Yes, on the face of it, there are things that I disagree with, but areas that I probably support. But again, the devil will be in the detail. So if the principles go through, we should all have the opportunity to proceed to the next step in the process, which will include the view of the highly expert advisor. And I want to have the opportunity to see that report, to digest the contents and the details in order to make a proper reasoned decision at the appropriate time. But I would like to understand why the Minister doesn't seem to have the same curiosity and why he didn't accede to the request for such a short delay, which would give, I believe, a completely different complexion to this debate. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. So I want to start by being very clear with the Assembly. I believe in a free market economy, and I fundamentally can't agree with the principle of rent stabilisation. I also don't agree that open-ended tenancies are the best way to move forward. People may say, well, what grounds have you got to make those assumptions? So please bear with me while I bore you with some detail of my previous life. When I finished my education in the very early 20s, I had no money, or very little money, but I borrowed and bought a small property. I worked hard, really hard, and I played hard, and managed to totally refurbish that property. My first tenant managed to trash the entire property within a matter of a few months. I had to work even harder to refurbish it. My second tenant stayed for very many years, and the difference between those two couldn't be more stark. During that time, I myself was a tenant and benefited from a number of 9-year leases, something I wouldn't be able to do if these principles go through. Eventually I bought and sold, and most recently I'm now the owner of another property and have enjoyed, if that's the right word, in the recent months, the size of insurance rises, and most importantly, the massive increases in the cost of materials to maintain your property. I've seen both sides of this argument, and I understand completely how it feels to be a tenant and a landlord. A bit like employment, really. I spent the first 10 years of my life as an employee and the rest of my life as an employer, and I think in both cases it's so important to understand both sides of any argument. I know we're not here to talk about the detail, but as was recently just been mentioned, the proposed cap on rent increases, and there's not benefit of experience, and I'm one of very few people in here who was trying to make a living back in the late 70s and early 80s, and I'd just like to remind members, when I first came into employment, in 1979 interest rates were 17%. By 1982 they dropped to 9%, but at the end of the 1980s they were back up to 15%. I can't understand why this figure of 5% was put in at all. I know the Minister has argued that there's other factors involved and that tenants can appeal to have them increased, or if you're making improvements. But at the end of the day, I don't understand that, and this is the principle of rent control. As a Minister, and I know the Deputy Miles has just asked for Minister's opinions, I have to say that I also have real issues with this proposition, because if accepted and we move forward, there are implications for the regulation department that I am responsible for. I have notable concerns regarding the requirement for my officers to be involved in establishing nuisance as a ground for eviction. Traditionally, such determinations would fall within the remit of the courts based on common law principles. I have further concerns because the terms serious and repeated nuisance are not clearly defined in legislation and do not equate to statutory nuisance. As such, my officers currently lack a clear legal basis to make these assessments. And given that Jersey doesn't have a common law nuisance in so many words, the only applicable standard is statutory nuisance, which carries an extremely high threshold and is criminal in nature. And I think I've spoken about this yesterday and the difficulty that we have with it. I'm further worried because requiring landlords to obtain input from my officers, whether they're my officers or indeed the officers of the Minister for Home Affairs, police officers, it will place additional pressure on services that are already operating at near or full capacity. While it's difficult to predict the exact volume of cases, the reduction in available grounds for tenancy termination may well lead to increased reliance on this route, and Housing and Nuisance Team does not, in my view, or should not, in my view, have a role of facilitating evictions. There's also the risk that the involvement of my officers could lead to inappropriate or unjustified investigations, potentially infringing on tenants' rights, including the right to peaceful enjoyment. This could inadvertently position the Directorate as a tool for harassment. While guidance for landlords and advice for landlords is helpful, it doesn't address the core issue, and that is the legal requirement itself. This approach may result in delays due to potentially lengthy investigations, creating an onerous process for landlords seeking to obtain possession through the courts. The existing system, which places the responsibility of eviction decisions with the courts, does not impact my officers' resourcing and allows for legal arguments to be made based on common law nuisance principles referencing case law in the UK. The proposed changes could significantly affect my already stretched service without any provision for additional resources. Should my team be asked or tasked with leading any implementation efforts, such as developing the guidance documents, codes of practice, or the community engagement, this would have a significant implication. It would require reprioritisation of existing work and dedicated resources, potentially impacting on other services. At the moment, we administer 35 laws on behalf of 6 ministers of government. I'm responsible for the resources of the Regulation Department, and I don't see the identified resources necessary to reflect what we might be putting forward today. But sir, in conclusion, I'd just like to say I'm a realist, and over the years I've realised that compromise is the only way forward and the only way to really make progress. Unfortunately, I don't see quite enough compromise in the proposition today. Finally, I want to say I'm a big supporter of scrutiny. I've chaired and vice-chaired a number of scrutiny panels, and they do good work. I want them to be allowed to continue to do their good work, and I would very much like, as Deputy Miles has said, to wait for their report. I want to be properly informed, and with that in mind, sir, I'd like to request a reference back so that this Assembly can be properly informed of all the facts before we vote on the principles.
One moment whilst I look to the appropriate standing order.
Article 83 says the member of the States may propose without notice during the debate on a proposition that the proposition is referred back in order that, and A, further information relating to the proposition can be provided to the States.
Yes, and I think I should...
Can I just ask a point of clarification? Is the mover proposing it as a minister or as an independent member? I didn't know if it's a ministerial position that they support a reference back.
Well, I don't think the member is required to state that. The member as a voice, as a member within this Assembly, and has asked for a reference back. And the further information that you are seeking is what precisely?
I'd like the further information to be the scrutiny report, which has started and yet to conclude, sir.
Yes, it appears to me that it is in order. My first question then, would it be seconded?
Can I raise a point of order?
Yes.
After you, sir, I'm just asking for a point of order, sir, because the chair of the scrutiny panel has indicated that she will call the legislation in, and so the report. Is this a point of order if you wish me not to pursue it? But I would have thought that I'm not challenging I'm wanting to establish that the absolute right of the scrutiny panel chair has been made and an undertaking given that she will call it in, yes, and therefore there will be a report there. That may be an observation that is needing in the debate, but I'm not sure we have a debate, sir. But I just thought that was relevant, sir.
Yes, well, the difference between what Deputy Luce is suggesting and allowing this to go and then the scrutiny to call it in is that, of course, if there is a vote against the proposition or against the principles, that's an end of the matter. However, if it goes back for consideration and it waits coming back after scrutiny is reported, then the principles will still remain to be voted upon. That's the essence of what happens, I think, here. And so there is a difference, but you're right, Deputy, at some point the scrutiny panel, in either event, if the principles are adopted, and it goes on, of course...
We will have a debate on the reference back, sir.
There will be a debate on the reference back.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm grateful.
So can I also ask a point of order?
Yes.
Can you just clarify whether the limit that applies when a proposition is lodged and then has to be debated within a certain period of time is effectively, that is stayed? That is stayed.
No, I can't allow this if it means that it can't be resumed at a future occasion.
So can I just ask for a point of order?
If your reference is to the 6-month rule, then now the debate is open, the 6-month rule is effectively gone. I mean, we are in a different procedure. Yes, Deputy Tadia, you had a point of...
Yes, it's when the proposer stood up, I thought I heard him say he wanted to refer it back, which made me think he's referring it back to the Minister, but there seems to be confusion as to whether he's referring it to the Minister or to scrutiny.
Well, it's a valid point. The norm for a reference back is to refer back to the bringer of the proposition. In this case, we reference back to the Minister. The standing order doesn't immediately require in express terms that is the case. And therefore a reference back, I think, can take place in these circumstances, unusual though it may be.
So if the reference is a reference back, I think that it's referred back to the Minister. So it seems to be what the Minister's asking for. And I think, if I remember, does there need to be a point that some clarification that is sought from the Minister about something that's unclear in the proposals that
well, it either has to be further information or tidying up an ambiguity in the legislation. It doesn't have to be both. It has to be one or the other.
So could we know what that is, sir, before we consider it?
Are you able to specify further what information you would ask of the Minister?
So I'm not particularly sure I'm asking anything of the Minister. The article in standing order doesn't refer to the Minister. It just says a member of the States may propose without notice during the debate the proposition be referred back. It doesn't say to where, but in this case for further information, in this case the scrutiny panel, relating to the proposition so it can be provided to the States.
I think on further reflection, Deputy Luce, it does seem to me that the point raised by Deputy Tade is well made and that a reference back has to be back. In other words, it's not a reference to something that is not already engaged within the context of the parliamentary debate, in other words, the move of a proposition. A reference to scrutiny occurs only at the end of the principles, otherwise it must be a reference back to the Minister for specific further information or for the clarification of an ambiguity. Now, if, as you've indicated, you don't think you have any questions specifically for the Minister, and that's the basis on which the debate will take place, then I think on mature reflection, I should not allow this as a proposition. So do you have anything you wish to refer back to the...
If that's your decision, so abide by it, of course.
Very much. Well, in which case...
Could I just ask a point of order just to understand standing orders as well, sir?
Yes.
Would, if members did want the same effect of a reference back, would a proposal to move to the next item, in essence, shuffling the completion of this, move it? Just logistically, I'm not proposing that myself, just I want members to know what options they have.
Deputy Curtis, I think the position is there are, if people don't want the debate to continue to the end of the principles, if they do not want to do that, there appears to be two valid options open to the Assembly, and clearly I'm not in any sense suggesting this is the correct thing to do, but these are things to be possibilities. It's firstly, as you suggest, a move to the next item. That simply brings the debate completely to an end. We move to the next item of business, and it will be for the relisting, this to be relisted on a future occasion, for the matter to be brought again. It doesn't fall off the order paper, it just ends as of the course of the day. The other thing is to refer to scrutiny under standing orders, which can be done by a member at this point. All that is doing, it seems to be in the light of the indication given by the chair of the scrutiny panel, is to make the reference to scrutiny a shorter process than waiting until the end of the debate. The difference is, of course, people will not know what the vote on the principles would have been. I hope that's of some assistance. Chief Minister?
So my light is just on to speak, sir, when Deputy is finished. Thank you.
When the moment comes. So there is no now a reference to a reference back. Had you finished your speech, Deputy Luce?
I think I have, sir.
There is nothing else of a procedural nature, mercifully, before the Assembly at this moment. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. The draft residential tenancy Jersey Amendment Law represents a measured, a balanced and necessary step towards strengthening our legal framework for rented homes. If adopted, it will fulfil a clear commitment in our common strategic policy to improve arrangements for both tenants and landlords and to help to address the wider pressures within our housing system. The need for action is plain. Jersey is experiencing housing challenges that, if left unchecked, threaten our social cohesion, our economic resilience, and perhaps most importantly of all, our demographic sustainability. Questions focused on by Deputy Wilson yesterday, important questions. Far too many islanders, particularly young people and families, struggle to find homes that are both secure and affordable. And I want to say at this stage, sir, very clearly, like other members, that I acknowledge that the vast majority of landlords and tenants are good, responsible people, but unfortunately, some are not. And that is why we need to have the relevant and appropriate laws in place. Many islanders, many young islanders have begun to question whether their future lies here. And this is not a situation that any of us should accept. It is the duty of any reasonable government to take action, sir, and that is what we are trying to do. The rental market plays a vital role in meeting the island's housing needs. Around half of all households in Jersey live in rented accommodation. That market must operate fairly and transparently, with clear responsibilities on both sides and with protections in place for when things go wrong. At present, the legal framework does not provide that assurance. The 2011 residential tenancy law was a positive step in its time. It introduced key features that brought structure to our rental sector, tenancy agreements, deposits, condition reports, and a general basis for regulation. But more than a decade later, it no longer meets the needs of a modern society, sir, of modern tenants and modern landlords. Tenants can still be evicted without reason, exposing them to uncertainty and, in some cases, unfair treatment. Rent can be increased with little notice or justification, and too often tenants encounter hidden fees or terms they were not prepared for. Landlords, meanwhile, lack a consistent framework for managing problematic tenancies or recovering properties in unforeseen situations. They face ambiguity and at times unfair characterisation, despite the fact that the majority of landlords in Jersey are fair, sir. It is time to update the law, not to penalise one side or favour another, but to create a clear and balanced system that builds confidence and certainty for all involved. And the principles that will lead to the draft amendment law coming, sir, after scrutiny does exactly that. It introduces longer notice periods for tenants who have lived in their homes for many years. It ends a practice of evicting tenants without cause. It provides rent stabilisation measures to prevent unexpected or unreasonable rent increases, while still allowing landlords to increase rents fairly and recover properties when they need to, sir. The legislation introduces a new form of tenancy agreement, one that begins with an optional fixed term of up to 3 years, which then automatically converts into a periodic tenancy unless otherwise agreed. This offers clarity and flexibility, and most importantly, it protects tenants from cycles of short-term renewals that leave them in a permanent state of uncertainty. The notice periods for landlords are tiered. For long-standing tenants, 6 months notice will be required in normal circumstances, sir. For newer tenants, the current 3-month standard will continue, sir. Of course, a lot of this we're going to come back to, hopefully, if the principles are approved today and scrutiny can do their work, sir. And I'm pleased that these proposals have been developed through wide consultation with the Landlords Association, and I thank them for their commitment to engaging, sir. The Jersey Hospitality Association, Farmers Union, Housing Trust, Tenants Group, Citizens Advice Jersey, and many others have all contributed. There's been significant engagement with environment, housing and infrastructure, the scrutiny panel, sir, and I thank the panel for its careful consideration and collaboration. I welcome the fact that the lodging period for this legislation has been extended to accommodate its work. Feedback from across the sector has been mixed, sir, of course, but this is not surprising. The proposals are not radical, they're considered, proportionate, and rooted, sir, in evidence. Crucially, this proposed legislation also introduces a more transparent and sustainable approach to rent, sir. Under the proposed draft amendment law, rent may only be increased once per year, and any increase must be limited to the rate of inflation or capped at 5%. And this cap can only be exceeded where a landlord has made improvements to benefit the tenant, sir. So it's not a cap, it's more of a bar, it's more of a check for tenants and landlords to find agreement moving forward. This balanced approach protects tenants from sharp or unjustified increases while ensuring landlords can continue to make a fair return and invest in their properties. An independent rent tribunal will oversee these arrangements. Landlords will not need prior approval to raise rent, but tenants may appeal increases they believe are unreasonable, sir. The tribunal will be independent, impartial, and equipped with the expertise to make fair, evidence-based decisions. It is also important to note that this legislation improves transparency around fees and charges. Tenants will know from the outset what costs they are liable for, what responsibilities they have for repairs, services and early termination must all be clearly set out in writing, and this will help prevent disputes and foster better landlord-tenant relationships. The proposed law also addresses situations where a property becomes uninhabitable. If this occurs and the tenant is not at fault, they will not be liable for rent. And so importantly, this proposed legislation lays the groundwork for a better understanding of our rental sector overall. And for the first time in many years, we will collect reliable data on actual rents charged, not just advertised prices, sir. And this will inform better policy making and provide much needed insight into affordability and supply, sir, as we move forward, because the island will evolve, as people will evolve, and the markets, the housing markets will evolve, sir. And in the future, it's going to be essential that we have such information. Previous governments have made attempts to reform and promises to reform tenancy law, but too often the proposals have been overly complex or delayed by attempts to do too much too quickly. And this government has taken a different path. We have focused on delivering meaningful reform, so within the current term, and that partly answers Deputy Miles's question as why the order this is coming. It's because there is a genuine commitment and desire by at least some ministers, I know we are slightly not all agreed on this, to achieve this in line with our common strategic policy approved by this Assembly within this term, sir. And that's the only thing behind wanting to get this in front of the Assembly. There's no other reason, just that, to get it done and in place during the term of this government. Of course, the legislation that's proposed that we'll come back to, hopefully in the future, does not solve all of our housing challenges, but it represents a significant and necessary advance. It creates fairer, clearer and more balanced rental system. It supports both tenants and landlords, and it strengthens our legal foundation, and it reflects the kind of community we aspire to be, sir: fair, secure and inclusive, sir. In closing, I would like to remind members and speak that insofar as that this is not just about legislation and policy. This debate is probably more about people. It's about families. It's about our children and about this Assembly's solemn responsibility to them. Because ultimately the question before us is not simply about housing reform. It is this: what kind of future do we want to build for Jersey's children? And in my view, sir, the answer begins with a safe, stable and affordable home. And that is precisely what we are trying to achieve through these principles, and ultimately, I hope, with any legislation that comes before this Assembly. As I mentioned earlier, sir, half of all households in Jersey live in rented homes, so it's not unreasonable to think that almost half of all children in the island live in rented homes. Yet too many children grow up never knowing how long they'll stay in their home, whether their family can afford the next rent rise or they'll be forced to move with little notice. Now, that kind of insecurity is not just inconvenient, it's deeply disruptive. It affects children's education, their friendships and their sense of security and belonging. And we are determined to change that. And this Assembly should also be determined to change that. The principles we bring forward today, if accepted, will create a pathway that will help children by giving their families the stability they need. It will guard against sudden, unexplained evictions. It will bring predictability to rents, and it will allow parents to plan, settle, and invest in their children's future with far greater peace of mind. A child who knows, a child who knows where they will be sleeping next week, next month, next term, next year, is a child more able to thrive in school, in play, and in life. These reforms are not just helpful, they are essential, and they are fair. Good landlords have nothing to fear. On the contrary, the legislation supports them too, through clearer rules, longer-term tenancies, and a more predictable rental environment. And I do look forward to that debate. I look forward to the government participating in the work of scrutiny where it has to. Throughout the process of developing these proposals, we've not only listened to tenants and landlords, housing trusts, legal experts, and crucially to children themselves. The Office of the Children's Commissioner has played a key role in helping to shape these reforms, ensuring the rights and the needs of the children are properly represented. And I point members' attention to the careers which accompany the proposition. Because protecting children's rights, cannot be an inspiration alone, it must be demonstrated through action. And I wanted to remind members today of their responsibility in this debate, because I don't think it's been high enough priority in our discussions in this Assembly. The rental market, touches thousands of lives, but the most vulnerable among them are often the youngest. And when we strengthen housing protection, we strengthen childhoods. And let us send a clear, unequivocal message to every family in Jersey that your children matter. Their futures matter, their homes matter. Deputy Alex Curtis, and who's not in the Assembly right now, explained succinctly why we should support the principles. It's so we can keep the journey going to more secure housing for half of our islanders, sir. The current laws can be improved for the benefit of all, sir, And I urge members, sir, I really do urge members, I urge my colleagues in the Council of Ministers who are having second thoughts to please support the principles. Thank you.
Deputy Ward, do you have a point of clarification?
Yes, I do have a point of clarification, sir. The Chief Minister mentioned that over 50%...
do you give way for a point of clarification?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, the Chief Minister mentioned that over 50% of people live in rented accommodation. He hasn't split out that between social housing provision and private sector provision, and clearly this legislation does not affect or impact on...
that is...
and I just want to clarify that. That was just want to clarify that he is including both social and private.
A point of clarification is asking him for a point of clarification of his speech, or for you clarifying something you have already said in the Assembly which may have been misunderstood and misrepresented. It isn't the opportunity to qualify someone else's speech with further information.
That's not clarifying. Okay.
So am I entitled to ask a point of clarification?
If the Chief Minister will give way for a point of clarification, yes.
Thank you, sir. I would be most grateful for the Chief Minister to explain the issue of ministerial, the ministers. He said in his remark, and I wonder if he could explain, if he could clarify, he's asking ministers to support this. And I previously asked about collective responsibility in matters of minority governments, etc. But I think that I'm not alone in being confused, sir, that this is a standalone proposition of massive importance in the Housing Minister's name, but the Chief Minister is issuing a rallying call. Could he clarify what he's saying to his ministers? Because what is the point of disagreement that ministers, he's asking them to agree upon? Because I'm not clear, because it's a rather unprecedented situation for the ministers to be not having collective responsibility clearly on such an important matter of public business. I hope that's in order, sir, because it's a really important issue.
Is it something that you can offer further clarification?
I can clarify again, so I've clarified it a number of times in this Assembly. And I'm pleased and very proud to be part of a team, a collaborative team of ministers, but also a pragmatic team of ministers that truly do, I think its makeup truly do represent this Assembly and ultimately the people of Jersey. Because we are a broad church of political views, there is quite often a difference of opinions, which is welcome, because when there are different opinions, it often means we debate far deeper and in far more detail, as testing as that can be, and that delivers us to 9 out of 10 times good government positions on most issues. This is one particular item, sir, that the Council of Ministers couldn't all agree on, and so we have a process to follow. And that process is, because we don't have collective responsibility in our standing order, sir, we have to work truly in a democratic fashion. So we either have a government-agreed position on something where we're all aligned, we have a free vote on certain issues, or we have something called an agreement to differ. And that is in our, this is where ministers, at our Council of Ministers meeting, will explain their position, explain the reason why they can't agree. So often is an example of a deeply held view or something, or manifesto commitments, and then we are permitted, as Deputy Ward, I think, spoke this morning, in line with their convictions, sir. Having said that, though, sir, I still will at times urge ministers to support the position. And that's how I finish my speech, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
I am grateful for that clarification, sir. I'm
Deputy
grateful.
Just a point. I didn't think a point of clarification was subject to timing.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it is, but it was. But there we are. Yes, I think it depends. I think if a point of clarification is, I clarify this by saying A, B, and C, then probably it's not. If it's, I clarify it by slightly elaborating at some significant length on my previous speech, then it probably is, Chief Minister. But I think we just have to take this.
Well, sir, I'd finished anyway, so thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much indeed. Deputy Tavier.
Sir, I have a further point of clarification, if possible.
From the Chief Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
Do you give way for a further point of clarification, bearing in mind that will be effectively a question and answer?
I'm happy for the Minister to carry on, but I do recall you called me to speak, and I'm wondering at what point the Minister's speech would have finished.
Well, I have to say I had assumed that when Deputy Stevenson's light went on that she was signalling an intention to speak. Therefore, I would have called her after you in the ordinary way. She's now indicated she wishes to make a point of clarification, which I had not assumed. We will get to you, Deputy Tallier, there's no doubt about it. And the point of clarification will have to admit a very brief answer, Chief Minister, if that's possible. Will you give way for it?
Depending on the question, sir, it's possible.
Hopefully it will be a very brief one. I think I heard the Chief Minister say early on in his speech that scrutiny had been given time to carry out their work. Can he just confirm that isn't actually the case? And we heard from the chair of the panel earlier that requests to put the debate further so they could finish their work actually weren't agreed.
I'm looking for the part in my speech, sir, but what I was referring to was that I welcomed the additional time that scrutiny had to consider this. So if I wasn't clear, so that's what I meant, sir.
Thank you very much, Chief Minister. Deputy Tallier, no more points of clarification.
Thank you, sir. And I'm willing to take any points of clarification, given that they don't come off my time. That's good to know. Sir, I'm pleased to follow the Chief Minister. He didn't necessarily give a tub-thumping speech, but I think what he did give is a very well-considered and thoughtful speech with lots of reasons as to why all members, and certainly his ministerial colleagues, should be supporting his point of view and what the Minister for Housing is trying to do here with the principle. And because we've got Bastille Day coming up next week, and because there's a really good programme of events this weekend in the Royal Square for the French Festival, sir, which I encourage anyone to go to, I thought I'd start with a couple of words in French. One is, the first one that came to my mind is plus ça change, or to complete it, plus ça change, plus ça reste la même. And then I'm also mindful of the English-French phrase that we've adopted, which is déjà vu, of course, which certainly I think I've been here many times before, and I don't want to necessarily repeat speeches that I've made in the past. But I'll start with this. Sometimes something serendipitous happens. So when I got up this morning and I had to go to a breakfast engagement, I must have left too soon, because when I got to the Assembly, I realised I didn't have my laptop charger. And I had very little battery on my laptop. That's why I don't have a laptop in front of me at the moment. And so I thought about, I need to make some notes for my speeches. I need to do points of research. We each get, I think, used to technology. So I looked in my drawer and I came across the report of the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry, the 2019 interim follow-up after 2 years of issuing their main report. And I thought to myself, does this Assembly still have an ethos of putting children first? Because that certainly was the big buzz phrase a few years ago. And again, it's something that the Chief Minister mentioned in his speech. He didn't necessarily use the words putting children first, but he did say that we need to make sure that we're looking after children and it remains an ongoing issue. And I think the reason I keep this in my drawer is partly to remind me about why ultimately I'm in politics. It's not just for us, it's not to talk about ourselves. It's really to think about who are the most vulnerable in our community, and it's also to remind ourselves that we need to learn from the lessons of the past across the piece, and that the children, of course, are the ones that we should be having in the forefront of our mind. And one of the key messages that comes out in here, in the main report, but also if we think about the UNCRC, which this Assembly has also adopted, is that at the heart of all the policy-making decisions that we make as an Assembly in our considerations, the voice of the child should be front and centre in that. And I pose the question, where is the voice of the child? But more importantly, where is the voice of those children who, perhaps in families, who are least able to speak out in our community? Where is the voice of the Filipino child, the Portuguese, the Polish, the Kenyan, or indeed the British child? They're all Jersey children, of course, that they're living here, and let alone their families in trying to be able to speak out. One of the great things about living in a small island like ours is that our democracy is very intimate. We know a lot of the people that engage with us in politics. And that can feel like a double-edged sword sometimes. It's two sides of the same coin. It means that, of course, that when changes are coming that affect people's interests, that quite rightly they do lobby us quite hard. But I also think about the recent first aid training that I redid. And when you attend the scene of an accident, when there's an emergency, if you like, it's not the ones that cry the loudest that you necessarily need to go to and attend to. It's the ones that are actually not making any noise. And so that's a particular scenario that happens on the road, but we're dealing with a different crisis here. I think we are still in a period of housing crisis. And of course, the gallery isn't full. I've said this before. The gallery isn't full with tenants. It's not full with children at the moment. That's not because there aren't any tenants in Jersey. There are definitely more tenants in Jersey than there are landlords. There are definitely more children living in those homes than there are necessarily children renting out homes or other families. So I think we need to sometimes check ourselves when I hear comments, and I'll get onto this in a moment, from the Minister who's supposed to be representing children and their interests, saying that all of the people who came to speak to me about this only own one or two properties. So that's all the landlords, of course, that have come to see the constable in St. Peter. I don't know if they were coming to see him as constable or as minister. But what about the other people who didn't come to see the constable, that are living in his parish, arguably in difficult conditions? So I turned to some of the pages in the interim 29 report, or the follow-up report, as I should call it, and I read the words from one care leaver in Jersey, who said that all I wanted was a stable family home where I could have my own children and have my own house. And I think this is a very simple aspiration. Whether that house is ultimately one that is owned by them or one that they're renting, I think is a very normal, but also very basic, fundamental human desire. Some security is what we're talking about here. So when we go back to the principles, what we're talking about here is really, as far as I can see, the principle that we need to have a system which acknowledges that, on the one hand, people have a right to enjoyment of their property. It's a basic, fundamental human right to have enjoyment of your property, but that is also checked by the fact that when you then rent that property out, the person who is renting it also has rights and responsibilities in that. So this amended residential tenancy law that's coming forward is really, it's not saying that that contractual obligation doesn't still exist. It's not saying that it's no longer a private contract between two parties. It is saying that if and when things go wrong in that situation, the way in which things are dealt with, including the amounts that rent could be increased, because we know that rent hikes are not good for tenants and ultimately not good for the wider community, that the way in which those will be dealt with will be slightly different, but it's also inclusive. But that's yet to be decided. We're not to talk about that here today. So the first thing is really about putting children first. And why is it also a social and an economic issue? Well, I turn to another page of this report, which says, it talks about the difficulty of recruiting staff in Jersey across sectors, but including in the health sector. And those on the committee said, on the inquiry, said it is simply unrealistic to tout better quality of life as a reason to move to Jersey when housing costs and restrictions mean most workers and their families are moving to poorer quality accommodation, often with less security of tenure and less investment potential. Claims about the island's good work-life balance do not address the disadvantages of incoming staff and their families with less annual leave, poorer maternity benefits, fewer employment protections and additional health costs compared to UK work settings. But that could also apply to Jersey-born families who are considering leaving the island. So all of that is exactly true, talking about potentially poor quality accommodation. Now that's already, I think, largely been dealt with. It's not perfect yet, but there have been minimum standards that have come through and which have been adopted. And of course, none of this affects landlords who do the right thing and invest in their properties and are on top of it. So these are not things that good landlords need to worry about. But the whole point about security of tenure, I think, is a key issue here. And I think that is something that the Minister is quite rightly trying to address. And quite frankly, I've been a tenant in the past. I declare an interest here, so technically I'm going to be recorded as having an interest as a landlord, but it's my spouse who's, if you like, the accidental landlord. But I noticed that often when I was renting in the past, A periodic tenancy, and I know we're getting into the articles, I won't dwell on those, was just became the norm, because often you'd have that year of tenancy, that there would be no conversation between the landlord and the tenant necessarily explicitly saying, do you want to renew for another year? So you just go on to a rolling tenancy anyway, and that's when the RTL would kick in, and the usual contractual obligations on either side with notice periods. So, and it seemed to work fine, and I don't think what's being proposed here is any different, vastly different to what's being proposed, apart from the assumption is for periodic tenancies. But, you know, others will have different views on that. I'd like to make the point about social housing and private housing. I think if we were in a situation where there was lots of social housing and perfectly adequate amounts of it, and it was all in great condition, and that we didn't have long waiting lists for social housing, we might be in a slightly different, having a different conversation about the rights and responsibilities of the private sector. But the point is we don't have that, and essentially the private sector has a job to do effectively also as a social landlord, because you know, income support does give money to lots of people in the island, to the tune, last time I checked, of about £12 million of taxpayers' money that goes to pay for private rents, without necessarily being able to be assured of the kind of regulation that is in that area. So I think it is right that there is actually security of tenure and responsibilities that are not overly onerous for landlords, because you know this is all going to be looked at in the second reading. And that simply that the private landlords should increasingly be thinking more socially about their social obligations as well. The last point I'd like to make is something that I remember former Senator Sivray, when I think at the time, not long after he topped the poll, and he made the point in one of the hustings about asking the audience rhetorically, what is the second biggest industry in Jersey? I think we can all name the biggest industry in Jersey, although it's a composite. It's the finance industry, but the second biggest industry in Jersey is the housing industry, the private rental industry, and if you take into account, of course, Andium and the trusts, that's, on the one hand, is seen as an industry, and it's been largely unregulated, right? So no one suggests that finance shouldn't be regulated. Nobody says that the tourism industry shouldn't be regulated. So you can't just open up a hotel. You can't just open up a restaurant. You can't open up a trust company without expecting a certain amount of regulation. You can't drive a taxi in Jersey without expecting to be regulated and having your taxi inspected every year. I suspect you can't rent your own cars out as a rental car company without having those cars inspected. And when it comes to taxis, of course, there is a cap on what taxis can charge in terms of their fares. Why is that? It's not because the government wants to overly interfere in the free market. It's because they realise that it's good to have certainty for people coming into Jersey and for people using taxis to know what they're going to pay for. So in a similar way, it's also really helpful, I think, for tenants and for landlords to know roughly what the limits are in terms of what they can expect, rent hikes or rent increases. They might call them hikes at the moment if they're not sure what they're going to be. So I think all of this is entirely sensible. And I would simply ask, what is wrong with the principle about bringing in a system that seeks to give consideration to the needs of the tenants on the one hand and the needs of landlords on the other, and actually to say where the right balance is. And of course, all of these things will only kick in if there's a dispute. And as we've heard before, I don't think landlords set out to be bad landlords. I don't think they set out not to maintain their properties because it's not within their interest. Similarly, I don't think that most tenants set out to be bad tenants either. So it's only really when things go wrong that there's going to be a recourse which needs to be considered, it needs to be balanced, and it needs to be fair to both sides. And I think this is very much the intention of what Deputy Mezek is proposing and which the Chief Minister is supporting. There are 2 points I need to make before I sit down. The first is that I think it unfairly, Deputy Mezek and perhaps our party is sometimes accused of being ideological in what it's being put forward here. I think that's one of the charges levelled at him by the mover of an amendment, Deputy Balash, saying this is ideological. But actually, This isn't ideological at all. This is a pragmatic proposition that has had to come through a wide consideration, wide consultation, which has got the support of the Chief Minister, who is not a naturally left-leaning, I would say, politician, but one who has looked at this and actually is encouraging fellow ministers to support this. The ideology is those who just won't even consider this in the principles. That's where the ideological resistance is coming from, that any regulation is bad. I think we need to actually say it's not the regulation per se, it's how it's done. And the last one would be a plea, really, to the Children's Minister. It's absolutely remarkable that some 8 or 9 years on from the Care Inquiry, which talked to us about putting children first, that we have a Children's Minister here who is considering voting against some legislation which is primarily aimed at making people's lives better. And of course, it's about giving the voice, not to those few people who came to speak to the Constable as Constable of St. Peter, but it's about the thousands of children who live in potentially insecure accommodation in the island. That's where the Minister for Children should have his sympathy, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Scott?
Yes, sir. I just wondered if Deputy Tadier would offer a point of clarification to me, please.
Will you? No. Very well. Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. We may never know, sir, as you've sat there, you've come to the end of your term of serving the island in the Office of Bailiff, what goes through your mind? Not yet, no, not yet, but in due course. What goes through your mind? Do you sometimes sit there, sir, of course, listening to the debate? We wouldn't suspect anything other than that. Wishing for certain things to be, because I do occasionally wish for certain things to be. Nothing wrong, in my experience, with a bit of daydreaming. So from time to time. But those in the world of mental health will tell us it's quite good for us from time to time to do some daydreaming and wish that certain things might be. And the reason I say that, sir, because if for a moment I believed that the wishes that we have heard in members' speeches today for this piece of legislation could actually deliver that, if there were a piece of legislation that could actually deliver all the things that have been attributed to this legislation being able to achieve, then, sir, I would wholeheartedly support it. If this was a piece of legislation that could deliver, as we heard, safe, stable, affordable homes, if it could give that all the things that we've just heard Deputy Tadier talk about for children, all of the issues that Deputy Curtis, both Curtis, raised as needing to be addressed, if it could truly deliver that, then it would have my absolute 100% support. The problem is, sir, I can't just wish that it were so. I wondered where I really ought to start this morning, bearing in mind some of the speeches. This is the first reading of a piece of legislation. It's not new, it's not different to any other first reading of a piece of legislation. And therefore, I have always considered the first reading of a piece of legislation to be about the principles of the legislation. The principle of a piece of legislation, whether it's an amendment or whether it's primary law, or whether it's just regulations, is not whether the law ought to be amended. It is the principles of how the law is to be amended, not the detail, not the articles, not whether something should be 4% or 5%, but the principles of what is being proposed. And it was Deputy Curtis sitting opposite me said he approached the idea of principles of whether the law was perfect. If it wasn't perfect, then it should be amended, and therefore the principle of amendment was one that he supported. And the reason I raise that, sir, is because the bailiff designate yesterday was called upon to rule about the principles. And of course, sitting in that chair, he was astute, as you would have been had you had to make that ruling. And he said, ultimately, of course, it is a matter for each member to decide the basis upon which they are supporting the principles. And he was absolutely right in that regard. But for me, this is the principle. There are probably three principles. One is the principle of a new rent tribunal. The other is the principle of rent control, watered down to be referred to as rent stabilisation because it sounds more appealing and less clear about what it is. And then thirdly, the principle of introducing open-ended tenancies. And it is those principles that I am considering when I will cast my vote either later, it will be later this afternoon now, so rather than the morning. And of course, it would have been better if I could have considered those principles with the scrutiny report. Of course it would, because scrutiny have done a lot of work from what we've heard. They've employed an expert also from what we've heard. We could, of course, been debating the principles with the benefit of the scrutiny report. We are not, because the mover of the proposition wished to continue with the debate today prior to that scrutiny report. And that's, as Deputy Miles said, we are now put in this position, and that's no disrespect to the hard work that scrutiny have undertaken, to the instruction of what appears a competent expert to advise members, but that's the position in which we have been being placed. So it's important that we just remind ourselves of that, as Deputy Miles eloquently did. But I want to come back round to the idea of wishing. And the reason I come back round to that is because it is right that we consider people. The Chief Minister told us that this was a piece of legislation all about people, and of course that is correct. But it is also a piece of legislation about economics and how economics work. And I hear some gurning from my good friend. He has gurned at my speeches for 20 years. I've probably gurned at his speeches for 20 years as well, but there we are. That will go on, no doubt, sir. And why is it about economics? Because we've got to think about what actions will arise and what effect those actions will have upon our economy. And the mover of the proposition himself managed to find an OECD report, and he read from it in his opening remarks. I've not had time since those opening remarks to consider that report, but I think he said something along the lines that the economic view was quite balanced on the matter. And the reason I picked up on that was because the last time a government of Jersey, and I hold my hands up as a mea culpa, I was the Treasury Minister at the time, and I was called upon to bring forward some changes to stamp duty because the previous scrutiny panel had managed to persuade the Assembly that that was the right thing to do. And the advice from the economics advisors about having that additional stamp duty on buy-to-lets was, let's just say, balanced. They were trying to suggest that, and this is why people look for a one-armed economist, sir, but he was trying to say on the one hand this, and on the other hand that. And it was not clear. In that case, of course, we sit here now with a housing market in crisis, with no or very few transactions going through the Royal Court, with 1,800 properties on the market not being able to shift, and the buy-to-let section, which is the bit that stimulates new developments because it's a core investment of private money into those developments, so allows them to be built. That bit is basically non-existent, which is why we are not seeing new developments come to the market in the way that we have done. It has totally jammed up the market. Who knows whether we'll be able to do something about that in the forthcoming budget. But that was a piece of balanced economic advice. I, to be fair, do not actually think that the result of rent control in Jersey will be balanced on the economy at all. I think that if we look elsewhere, and I know we heard the mover of the proposition earlier say, well, it's not going to happen as happens necessarily elsewhere. I think we, for my part, and others, of course, will disagree, I think we can say that the greater potential is that rents will ultimately rise, that the size of the private rental market will dramatically reduce. We heard the Constable of Grouville, myth bust, talking about the existence of his family members, and I, of course, don't want to comment on that. But I can't be the only person who's had correspondence from people who have said that this and I know they've been poo-pooed by other members, who've said that if this legislation goes through, they will do one of two things. They will either sell their property, of course you could make the argument that selling their property might benefit others, or they will leave them vacant. And why is it difficult for us in this place to understand that leaving a property vacant might be something that someone chooses to do? It is because of the structure of our economy. We already know that yield on property in Jersey is not really as positive or comparative with other jurisdictions. Members may not like talking about this, but it is the reality. So why would you hold on to it? You'd hold on to it because you weren't looking for yield, you were looking for capital growth. And you had other reasons that you wanted to hold on to it for a longer period of time. And that's exactly what at least one correspondent with me has suggested that they would do. I was also, sir, fascinated to read recently the report of environmental health inspectors. I know my colleague to here, his inspectors work hard and they work under difficult circumstances, and as he's always reminding us, they feel that they're understaffed and underpaid. But to read about environmental health inspectors operating in Manchester in the United Kingdom and talking about some of the terrible situations that they experience, which are detrimentally affecting people's lives day in and day out. And they had come to the conclusion that they've got all of this legislation in place. They've got licensing schemes in place. They've got minimum standards in place. Does that remind you of anywhere, sir? Because we have those as well here. But they had come to the conclusion that the only thing that would actually help those citizens' lives in any meaningful way was an increase in supply and an increase in choice and the ability to be able to move because they chose to move and have the ability to be able to choose. And that was the thing that would ultimately ensure that landlords those bad landlords behaved in an appropriate way, as we hear majority of good landlords already do. So we come back to the old, unfashionable word that we have struggled with in times of inward migration, we still struggle with now, and we're struggling with today, and that is supply. We need a supply of family homes that are affordable. And the Minister, to be fair, I think is really doing a good job and really trying in that regard. We've got problems with drains to some of those sites that have been approved, but it's critically important that we get those built. The supply side has been hindered, of course, because there are a number of sites in the previous island plan that weren't accepted in this place. But it comes down to supply. And unless this Assembly and unless future governments are prepared to deal with supply, then we can continue wishing until the cows come home for milking this evening. We will not deal with the problems around the housing crisis and affordability and all of the other issues that members are passionate about unless we deal with supply. And therefore, it gives me no pleasure whatsoever to, unfortunately, not be able to support my colleague minister. We are in a coalition, but in this instance I can't support him, and I ask members not to do so as well, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Binney. Deputy.
Yes, sir. I'd like to thank Deputy Gorst for that speech, and I hope everybody listened carefully to it. Members will be grateful for the fact that it spared them having to listen to a 15-minute speech from me, which wouldn't have been anywhere near as eloquent. I think everything that needs to be said from my point of view, and perhaps several others, has now been said. Deputy Gorst, just add a few points to that. Deputy Gorst makes a very, very good point about the commercial implications of this. And I'll just remind people, because I've been sort of active in this sector for quite some time, that insurances in the last 4 or 5 years have doubled. If somebody wants to enter this market, the stamp duty is now 8%, which I think is absurd, and I think the Assembly has done an awful lot of damage to the rental market by introducing the extra 3%. If you want a lawyer, you need a lawyer when you get involved in property. I think the average price for a lawyer now is between £600 and £700 an hour. I sent an email the other day for a quote for a conveyancer, £475 an hour. And I happen to know that we confront construction costs here that are equivalent to central London, and that applies to maintenance as well. A couple of other points I'd like to make is that I don't think anybody in this Assembly has a monopoly on caring for people from the poorer sections of society or caring for children. There are ways of doing things, and some people think that's by legislation. I happen to think it's by this Assembly allowing markets or encouraging markets to do what they do. And the truth of the matter is, if we can provide more supply, it will give bad landlords no choice but to do the job properly, because people will choose to go elsewhere. And I think the sooner we start to encourage that as a solution to this complex problem, the better, sir. So I think I've probably said enough, but I thank Deputy Gorst again for an excellent speech.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy. Deputy Gardner.
So actually it's not a speech. I would like to check and listen to Deputy Gorst and listen to Deputy Lewis and listen to Deputy...
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I would like to check if I can operate Standing Order 79 and refer to the scrutiny.
Right, so you're making an application to refer to scrutiny. One moment. So you propose a reference to scrutiny, Deputy?
Correct, sir. And I can.
Well, I think you can propose a reference to scrutiny, yes. So would you like to do so?
Yeah, sure. First of all, we did have engagement with the Minister. As a President of Scrutiny Liaison Committee, I worked with the scrutiny of the chair panel and I raised it with the Chief Minister because we believe that first debate in September could be all-inclusive, that will have all details. Scrutiny panel worked very hard over the months and received lots of evidence that I believe should be presented to the states members to make informed decision. I've listened to Deputy Lu's speech and actually Deputy, the Minister for External Relations, Deputy Ghost, very clear stated that this information would help for everyone in this assembly to make the decision. I don't want to risk that scrutiny work will be wasted if principles will be voted down, and I believe that we need to have not jigsaw puzzle and to see the whole package together and not have box missing, and this is why I propose in reference to scrutiny, and scrutiny assured that it will be back first sitting in September. We are not telling that will not be debated and voted and made decision.
Is the proposition to refer matter to scrutiny pursuant to Standing Order 79 seconded?
Yes, sir.
Very well.
May I raise a point of clarification just for understanding, sir?
Sorry, is this a point of order?
Well, I think it must be, sir. So could you please rule what we are referring to scrutiny? Because there has been a very helpful ruling by the Deputy Bailiff, sir, about the contents of the arrangements of what we're agreeing in principles. We're referring it back at this stage to scrutiny, sir, for a review of the principles or the actual draft legislation. And my question, which is an insufficient understanding of standing orders, is that would it come back to the Assembly and then still be capable of being called in by the relevant scrutiny panel on the detail? Are we effectively having a studio?
The answer to the second question is no. If the matter, perhaps I'll deal with it in a slightly different order. If it's referred to scrutiny, the entirety of the legislation is referred to scrutiny. If at this stage, and scrutiny will do scrutiny's job in connection with it. When it comes back, then it's the debate, but the matter first comes back at the next sitting, which is in which the chair of the scrutiny panel needs to say whether or not scrutiny accepts it. So one assumes it will have already been accepted. That will be a pure formality, but technically that's what happened next. And then when scrutiny will report upon it. Now, you've had the indication as to when that process is likely to be concluded, but in terms of the procedural steps that must take place, if the Assembly votes to refer it to scrutiny, debate is immediately suspended, and it will come back next sitting simply for the purposes of scrutiny saying if they're taking it in, and one assumes on what has been already indicated they will have done, and if so, when they will be prepared to respond to it. And that is an indication already given in the Assembly, but it's only crystallised at the next sitting. So I'm not sure that I can assist members any further on that point.
Then is a further step, sir, on when the scrutiny will report on their report, if they accept, but one assumes they will, then there will be then a reconsideration, and will that be subject to a further call-in right by the chair or not?
There won't be a reconsideration on standing orders provide that the relevant scrutiny panel comes back, because standing orders are built upon the presumption that the scrutiny panel might not be expecting to have the matter scrutinised and will therefore need to consider it. So standing orders require that the matter is referred back on the next occasion, and the scrutiny panel then says, yes, we are prepared to scrutinise it, and we will report within the following occasions, and there's a limit on how long it can take. And when it's reported on, the matter of the debate can be brought again.
I'm grateful, sir.
So may I ask, if that happens, and scrutiny come back and report, and then we vote on the principles, and if the principles are accepted, is there then no route for the articles in second reading to be called in again? Are we assuming that that scrutiny has already been undertaken? Because I think that's the intention. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the question, Deputy. The position is that a matter is scrutinised by a particular panel on a single occasion. So there's no opportunity to refer back to that panel. And one of the reasons that a reference to scrutiny cannot take place is if it has already been referred to that panel for scrutiny. Scrutiny panel is not expected to do a job more than once. I don't think I can assist further than that. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Just to further clarify, if this proposition were carried, does that mean that, because I understand many people in the Assembly wish to see the report of scrutiny, does that effectively potentially delay the publication of that report in the interim? Because
No.
right.
Scrutiny can continue to work as it's doing at the moment. It can continue to work without pause. It doesn't have to suddenly pause before it comes back on the next occasion. Scrutiny is the master of its own work and preference and process, and I'm sure it will, as it's indicated it wishes to do, will continue to do its work, if that assists you. Deputy Reniff.
Yes, sir. Can I ask a point of order? Can you clarify if the proposition to refer back is supported? When the debate picks up again, does the debate resume or does it start again?
Let me look up the standing order. I think the answer is the debate starts again. And the reason that that will be a logical outcome is that presumably there will be very substantial further information available to members who didn't have it before them when they had already spoken. So it would be right that they have the ability to speak again in the light of that. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I don't wish to labour this point, but can I just clarify, if we refer this back to scrutiny now, are we referring it back for them to tell us exactly what they've said already, that they intend to call it in? We're not going to do it back until we have the benefit of the report.
No. There's a procedural nicety which I don't think makes a difference in reality, Conotab. The fact is that technically the procedural nicety is that scrutiny comes back at the next hearing and says, yes, we will call it in, and we know that scrutiny will say that because scrutiny has already indicated it will call it in. It will, in the intervening period, have been continuing, one assumes, to work in the way that it had been working up to now, and then there will be a time limit within which they will bring the report back. But it's not that everything has to wait until the next sitting. One assumes that scrutiny continues its work. I will take other points of order, but perhaps members could be satisfied they are essential for the purposes. Yes, Deputy.
Yes, thank you, sir. I had indicated already in a letter to the Minister that we were going to bring our full report ahead of the 9th of September sitting. Just to clarify that we would be able to bring it back for the 9th of September and then actually say it do the whole debate on the 9th of September, just to clarify.
Yes, well, that's extremely helpful. Thank you, Deputy. Yes, Deputy Scott?
So just to appreciate, if scrutiny in that interim do produce an amendment, then is there not that possibility that on that basis they don't call it in? I mean, when we get to September.
Scrutiny has already indicated it will be calling it in at the end of the vote on the principles, on the assumption the principles are adopted. At this point, it's let's stop now, not vote on the principles, and refer it to scrutiny now. There's no circumstances, as currently understood by the Assembly, in which scrutiny will not be continuing a scrutiny process and bringing the matter back before the Assembly. Yes, Deputy?
Thank you, sir. I do have a point of order. It's about the time scale for amendments to any amendments, because if scrutiny called us in, when we come back to debate it, if the principles are passed, then we have to debate the amendments and the amendments to the amendments and amendments to amendments, whatever happens. So when will be the deadline for that, so that members are very clear as to what we're actually doing here? We're moving the entire debate into one day, it appears, after spending a day debating it now. So I'm going to be clear about when amendments would be able to be made.
I'm not sure this proposition makes any difference to that, because we're only suspending it at the argument relating to the principles. In other words, whatever the delays are for bringing amendments to the in second reading, those are the delays that exist now. So I don't think I need to clarify that for the purposes of this debate. And I'd have to give it some thought.
Sorry, sir, and I'm very confused, because it did seem to me that when we come back in September, whenever, we will be having the entire debate on the principles and
Yes.
but they are amended, sir. There are amendments to them. Deputy Balash has produced amendments.
Yes,
So
and those will be
is-
dealt with at the same time.
So what is the deadline for amending those amendments, is what I'm asking, sir.
Well, the short answer to that question, Deputy, is the usual lodging periods will apply. So when the matter is listed for return, amendments will need to be lodged 2 weeks before, and amendments to amendments will need to be lodged the week before that. I mean, there isn't nothing changes as a result of that.
But just to confirm, sir, as this is the last sitting before September, is it the next sitting back that we'll be coming to? This would have to be lodged again.
I'm sorry, I'm starting to not follow precisely what the question is. The answer is, this is presented again, the debate starts again, and the Minister will present it again, but he'll present it presumably with the benefit of all of the information from the scrutiny panel.
Yes, I'm sorry, sir, if people are losing the will to live, because
No,
as
it's
an
not that.
elected member, I have a question, but I do have a question, which is that if we are bringing the entire thing back on the 9th of September, when will it be lodged? Will it be later today? So
If it comes back, then it's...
so when will be the deadline for amendments? Because I'm...
2 weeks before, it's exactly
2
the
weeks
same.
before the 9th of September?
Yes,
Okay,
two weeks before when it's returned, and the week before that. And it's not a question of losing the will to live, it's just I was not understanding what you were asking. Well, in case you were... Deputy Tellier.
Sir, don't need to look so worried, sir.
Well, it isn't personal, Deputy, it's just I'm not sure how many more questions there can be, but I'm sure you'll find one.
It's not a question, sir, but I
Okay.
was wondering if I could speak on the merits of the reference to scrutiny.
Oh, I see. Yes, so we have it's been proposed, and now we have a debate on whether the matter should be referred to scrutiny. It's not actually a reference back, it's a reference to scrutiny. And Deputy Tellier, yes, please.
So look, I think we need a little bit of political honesty here with what's going on. So essentially, we haven't even agreed on the principles yet. And as the ruling yesterday from the Deputy Bailiff said, the principles of any proposition, including this one, are highly subjective, and it depends what it means to you. So to refer at this stage to a scrutiny panel when we've almost concluded with all the speeches, that would probably take us to the vote. I don't know if any other member is waiting to speak, but there are members to speak. The logical thing would be, under the normal processes, is to, at this stage of a debate, is to have everybody speak who wants to speak, and then you could possibly refer it to scrutiny. But given the fact that the scrutiny panel have said they will be scrutinising this, but they want something tangible to scrutinise, the point to do that is to scrutinise it after the first reading has been passed and in the second reading, because there's something tangible to scrutinise, But the other key thing is that there's then been a fundamental in-principle decision of the states to indicate proceed. Or if indeed the vote doesn't get through, then nothing to vote, nothing to scrutinise, because there is no policy to scrutinise. And what we're witnessing now, I think, is that there might be a tendency, an immediate desire from opponents of this overall proposition to maybe score a quick victory and to refer this to scrutiny, and then when it comes back, vote against it anyway, because some people just don't like the idea of it, and that's fine. This is politics. There are arguments for and against. But the lesson, I think, that we can take from the analogy, dare I say it, is quite tenuous of what happened in the Brexit campaign for the Conservatives, is that in the same way that you don't hold a referendum on something that the government doesn't want to do, you don't refer a policy and legislation to scrutiny if the Assembly doesn't want to do it, because we're wasting everybody's time, not just our own, not just the scrutiny panels, but we're wasting the public's time, not to mention the administration, on this fundamental issue. So we need to get a clear steer from this current Assembly as to the merits of the principles, and let's be grown up about it. If we don't like the principles, full stop, don't vote for them. You know, we can cope with that. The Minister can cope with that. And if we do like them and we give a green light but say, okay, but we need to do more work, that's the normal parliamentary process that works pretty much everywhere else around the world, and that's what the scrutiny process is for. The scrutiny panel wants to call it in, let them do their job. I say that as a chair of a panel, and don't give them work to do, which ultimately members might be rejecting simply because they don't like the whole package. I think that's the sensible, that's the mature, and that's the pragmatic way to proceed.
Very much. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. In a similar vein, can I please try to urge members not to write off the last 24 hours of what I thought has been a very good, thought-provoking debate. There's a lot of thought gone into the speeches made. A scrutiny have already said they're going to call it in, and we welcome that extra time so they can do the work. And I'm not sure now that it covers us with any sort of credibility to suddenly, just go back on what we've all done. So please, I urge the Assembly to quickly dispatch with this item, as Deputy Gardner is. I don't criticise her for exercising her right to suggest it. We've had a good debate. Let's vote on the principles. If they are agreed, then scrutiny will do their work. They can bring it back in September. We can have further debate as we shape all the articles and the legislation, sir. We can then hopefully make a real difference in this term of office as set out in the corporate strategic policy, sir. And I would remind members that the need for action on this is plain, sir. We are experiencing a housing challenge, if left unchecked, threatens our social cohesion, our economic resilience, and our democratic sustainability. So this is an important debate, and we need to bottom it out one way or the other. Thank you.
Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. If I could offer some background that I hope will be helpful to members on this, on the engagement that happened with scrutiny in the run-up to today. Multiple private briefings were held with the scrutiny panel during the development of this law to keep them aware of what we were looking at and what shape the proposals were taking during that time, and then a subsequent briefing upon the completion of the draft law. At every point during that process, I said to scrutiny that I wanted to be as amenable as possible to them in order for them to be able to do a good review on it, because I thought that was in the interests of the island for that work to take place. And at the completion of the law and its lodging, we had dialogue between us, and it was asked by the scrutiny panel if I could delay the debate from its original June debate date until this state sitting, and that was so they would have enough time to do their review. And I said, of course, that works. My team is able to accommodate that, and we'll do what we can to support. When they got partway through their review, they realised that the quantum of submissions that they'd had required them actually to have a little bit longer to look over things in order to complete their review to the satisfaction they felt was right. And so they suggested that it would be better to have a debate on the start of September. I met with the panel privately to discuss what I thought the implications of that might be. And we were unlucky, I think, as the chair of the panel stated yesterday, that they only need a little bit more time on it, not necessarily a whole summer recess worth. But that doesn't work because we can't meet during the summer in order to debate it. So we would end up delaying longer than scrutiny actually need for it. And the point that I made to scrutiny then was that the longer it took for us to have a debate on the RTL meant that there would be pressures that might turn out to be insurmountable on the government side for officers to get ready to do the supplementary work that will need to be done if this law is amended so the law can be enacted, because the law won't be enacted instantly when the Assembly agrees to it. There will be a period afterwards in which supplementary regulations will need to come forward and eventually an enactment of the law signed off when everything's ready to go. So it's not instant and it will take time afterwards. And the later we wait for part of this debate to conclude, the harder it gets to do that work to complete it by the end of this term of office. So that is why the position we arrived at was that it would be helpful to have the Assembly resolve one way or the other on the principles of the law today, and then scrutiny can call it in, continue their work, and then we can debate the amendments, which I'm sure will be a lively debate, and there'll be different iterations that come to us at that point then. But that at least gives my team an opportunity over summer to work out how much resource they can dedicate now to the supplementary enactments that will need to come for this without completely wasting their time. So, sir, if we have the debate on the principles today and we complete that debate, and it's a resounding victory and passed by a substantial majority, it's reasonably safe to bet that my officers can do that work on the subsequent stuff, some of which will come back to the Assembly, by the way, in the form of some regulations, and know that they're not wasting their time, they're probably on to a winner there. If the Assembly rejects the principles today, we know not to bother wasting our time. We know, don't spend the summer on this, spend the summer on other stuff that will make a difference, so we can manage our time effectively. That's why it's important that we have a resolution on the principles today. Scrutiny members in the debate beforehand spoke in support of that, and it enables them to then focus their work on what comes after that. If, sir, we resolve to not even vote on the principles today, then officially we don't know one way or another whether this law stands any chance of being passed or not. And it means my officers are in limbo over summer, not knowing what productive work we can do on behalf of the people of Jersey. Do I take the gamble and instruct them to work on stuff that might get thrown in the bin in September? Or do I redirect them to other productive things they can do over summer and then find out we're behind in September when we otherwise would need to be there? So it is much more helpful to have a resolution on the principles today. If it's not accepted, then we can stand down, and that's helpful for us to then go on and do other productive things instead. Or we can stay on track and we can allow scrutiny to finish their work. My officers will have an indication of what it's safe to spend time on over summer, and then in September we'll resolve on some of the detail on this one way or another. That's the pragmatic way through that allows us to get best efforts, value for money and efficiency from government officers over summer. And I would say, sir, that Deputy Gardner referred to the speeches of Deputy Gorst and Deputy Luce about them wanting to see more scrutiny done. But I would put it to her, and I don't think Deputy Gorst will be too offended by me saying this, but we could give the scrutiny panel a budget of £1 million, get them to employ 50 top-ranking world academics on this and print their report carved in slabs of gold, and I think Deputy Gorst would probably still vote against it in the end, as other members in this Assembly who simply don't agree with what I'm doing. So I urge members, have the courage of your convictions today to say what you believe on the principles of this law, one way or another. But voting to delay the debate on that today inevitably means wasting public time and money and civil service efforts. And we ought to be cutting down on that because we do it far too often in government, wasting time and money on behalf of the people we serve. There are big inefficiencies in our government system that mean we're not spending money on frontline services and stuff that we ought to be focusing on. So I urge members to reject this, allow scrutiny to get on with their plan as it currently stands, and allows me to manage my resources in the most efficient and safe way possible without wasting time and money. Let's make that resolution one way or another today.
Sir, may I put a point of clarification?
Yes, sir.
Yes, very well, but I have to shortly ask members whether they wish to continue or not. Standing orders required.
I'll be very quick, sir. I wonder if the Minister, maybe Minister either now or in his speech later, could clarify what are his red lines that are simply issues or amendments that he will not accept in relation to this matter, because I just don't understand what the members are saying. It's the red lines.
I'm not sure that's a point of clarification that assists in the decision that the Assembly needs to make at the moment. That's perhaps something that could be dealt with later if it does happen. I'm afraid standing orders require, and it's already past the time.
I have a proposition on that, sir. I would like to propose, sir, before somebody proposes the adjournment, I'd like to propose, sir, I'm sorry members want their lunch. We vote on this item before lunch, sir, otherwise I fear we're going to be debating all afternoon.
So the proposition is that we do not adjourn in accordance with the usual provisions of standing order, but we continue the debate. Is that seconded? Does any member wish to speak on that? Those in favour, kindly show. Those against? I think there's a vote pour, in which case we continue. We will therefore continue until the debate is closed on this. Next to speak, Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Just very quickly, I would highlight, in listening to Deputy Tadier kicking off on this, that the principles are subjective, that understanding clearly in our own minds how we interpret them is important. And from what I heard from members today, and what I felt as somebody who scrutinised this quite a bit, but ultimately is almost somewhat bound by what I want to say to respect the scrutiny process, I actually think we should support this movement. I don't think it obviously delays things, notwithstanding the Minister's assertions. He mentioned there is work that if this is rejected today, officers will be doing over summer. That's always an option to do, but I do think that we should resolve to refer this to scrutiny now. Thanks, sir.
Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I agree with Deputy Alex Curtis. I've had, throughout the debate, I've been listening very, very carefully to all points to try to get my own sense of direction in this debate. And it has occurred to me as I've been listening, I feel like I'm flying blind on this, and I know there's a report, and the yes, I've read that, and I know there's the proposition, and the yes, I've read that, but there's so much information that is still missing. And actually knowing that scrutiny have done lots and lots of work, and just needed a couple more weeks to get that over the line, brings me even more to the point where I want to see what that is before I can sit there and talk about the principles. One of the reasons for that is because the principles are utterly and entirely linked to the regulations that sit underneath them. I think Deputy Gorse got it absolutely right. There are three elements to this. There's the rent tribunal, there's the rent control, and there's the open-ended tenancies. And they are absolutely fundamentally part of those regulations. I can sit there and say I find the open-ended tenancies very, very difficult to support. I can't see myself ever supporting that side of it. The rent control, I struggle with. The rent tribunal, I'm okay with. So as it stands for me, I'd probably vote against the principles because out of those three elements, 2 out of 3, I'm not really on with. But that equally is not fair because I do understand the desire to make sure that we have an attractive island where housing is something that people can understand and have a straightforward relationship with that makes it easy for them. So in that sense, I support the Housing Minister's attempts. But I just don't feel that what we have here, knowing scrutiny is already doing work, is really getting us to that point. So I don't at this moment want to vote against the principles, but if forced to today, I will. I don't particularly want to, but that report from scrutiny could really help me in the future and help the minister in himself. And there was one piece which really got me over the line on this particular aspect, and that was Deputy Luce. And that was where he talked about his own department's resource implications. And again, I don't like bringing matters to the financial and staffing implications as part of any report, but those aren't mentioned in that report. The only thing that's mentioned in the financial implications and staffing requirements is the rent tribunal. But there's a lot more of this, as proposed at the moment, that would require resources from Deputy Luce. But my interpretation of Deputy Luce's speech was that the housing minister hasn't spoken to him about those resource implications. And so I personally would also ask scrutiny to look at the resource implications, please. I think that's an important part of this whole package. So for me, sir, I will absolutely be supporting the reference to scrutiny. I think that is the right thing to do to make sure that as an assembly, we are not flying blind and that we have a strong understanding of what this is all about. Thank you, sir.
Much, Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I do feel that there's an elephant in the room when it comes to scrutiny, because this law has economic implications. We've not had comments from the Economics and International Affairs panel. I think that we need that information too. There's not, as far as I've been aware, any sort of interview with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development or the Chief Economic Advisor in that bigger context. And we've been hearing contributions about supply. You heard me talk about balance of payments and disinvestment, which can be inflationary. So members do need a lot more information than just what might be provided by the Environment and Housing and Infrastructure panel. I probably got that in the wrong order. So I also support the referral to scrutiny, but I think there needs to be more time for other scrutiny panels perhaps to ask some questions too.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. We started this assembly with P3 2025, which had us asking to debate the principles around the harbours, draft harbours and inshore amendments, which members voted to support based on the principle that we thought that those rules needed to be updated. I'm quite astounded that in this assembly we're just trying to figure out what our principles are based on somebody else's report. I am quite flabbergasted actually that we had a minister before asking for more information from a minister, when surely that should be a conversation that if he needed more information from his minister, it should have come up in the Council of Ministers. And so actually, if the minister wanted more information, then that was something he could have referred back to the minister, rather than where the other minister actually asked for a reference back to scrutiny. So this feels like it is politically weaponised to try and delay this debate. Now, sir, we have landlords in the gallery who are waiting for a decision on this because this is about their industry and their livelihood. Shall we delay that even further when we know that there are some people in here that are not politically aligned with changing this law? So if you're not politically aligned with the change of this law, then fine, vote against the principles. You don't need to refer it back because that is what we should be guided by in this debate. But right now, this referral back to scrutiny, we've said we're calling it in. We scrutinise the articles, not the principles. You have to scrutinise yourself whether you believe in the principles, and I'm glad that some members in this assembly have already come forward and said that they don't support the principles because, well done, you're doing your job. Thank you very much, members who are not aligning with these principles and would vote against them. So, sir, I urge members to reject this. Please vote with your principles. Let's get the principles done. Either we'll continue our work at scrutiny or we won't. Sir, I would either like to know now whether I'm going to have a summer recess with others or not. So, sir, I ask members to reject this. Let's finish this debate today. Let scrutiny call it in and bring it back for the articles which need the scrutiny because we don't scrutinise the principles.
Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir, and I also think we should get on and support the Chief Minister's view on this. We are 90%, I think, of the way through this debate. We're not voting to refer this to the EHI panel. That's not what we're voting for, or any other panel. This is about whether it goes to the correct panel. The process for that is laid out, and we expect to vote on the principles, and then the panel decide whether or not to call it in. They've said that they will. The correct process is being followed, and that is appropriate. it's interesting that every member of the scrutiny panel spoke during the main debate. Every member of the scrutiny panel spoke. They did not seem to me to feel constrained about the fact that they were unable to speak because they hadn't yet completed their work. They all made speeches, in substantive speeches about this. And none of them suggested at that point that they should change they should be asked to stop this. So if this reference to scrutiny is passed, I think the test is whether it will be worthwhile, is whether there is any substantial change in relation to the principles. Will scrutiny bring forward any change that will suggest that the principles are different? And I think the test of that is, were we to bring this back in September, we would all basically be making the same speeches all over again, because the principles are the same. The principles are the same. So as far as I can see, we should get on with the correct process of this, which is discuss the principles, scrutiny then call it in, do their work. And the Minister spoke about the potential waste of time of his officers. If this is referred back and then all the work's done and then it's thrown out at the principles stage, there's also, I think, a potential waste of time for scrutiny, because they also would do a whole load of work which then might end up being rejected. So I think, I think for all those reasons, let's just get on and talk and vote on the principles of this and reject this proposition.
The member wish to speak on this proposition, Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to follow the previous speaker, because we have process in this assembly. We vote on the principles. If it is being called in, it goes about the articles. Most of the speeches that have said we can cut out the principles, but I can't agree with the principles because of the articles, those are the things that we have to debate after the principles have been agreed. This is what we do in this assembly, but we seem to be able to move the goalposts whenever we fancy at times, particularly in some areas that we want to protect, it appears to me. And that is very, very worrying for us as an assembly. Now, if you don't agree on all of the articles, that's fine. Then come back when the articles are there, speak against them, make a clear speech, say why you don't agree with those articles, and vote against them. That's our job in this assembly. But just to say, oh no, let's throw the whole thing back, we won't make a decision today. After nearly a day of debate, we will say, oh no, we're not going to make a decision today because we cannot decide on any principles. Now that is a message we send out to the electorate and people on this island. We can't decide on principles. I can. The principles of, do we need to look at the rental laws? The answer is yes, we do. Then we bring back the articles and we have the debate on those articles after scrutiny has done its job. And it's amazing that this reference to scrutiny has happened at the end of the debate. If it was that clear at the beginning, do it at the beginning and not waste an entire day. But that's what's happened, because every straw has been clutched to try and stop us having the debate on the articles. Why is that? Why are we avoiding that? I really do not understand why. If we come back to this assembly and people want to vote against a rent tribunal, say why you don't think we should have a rent tribunal. If you want to vote against capping rent, say why you want to vote against capping rents. If you want to vote against certain types of tenancies, say why you want to vote against certain types of tenancies. That's fine, but be straight down the line about it. We are playing political games here to avoid decisions, and that is not good for this assembly. So let's not send this straight to scrutiny. Let's vote on the principles. Then it is going to scrutiny once they know the principles have either been agreed, or if it's decided that we're never going to have that debate because the Assembly doesn't even want to agree the principles, then let's not waste their time over the summer. This is not an effective use of our time. It's not an effective use of this Assembly, and it does not look good out there. So please think carefully about what you're going to do here, and let's get on with voting for the principles. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I feel somewhat constrained because of the decision of the Chief Minister to basically require this vote. I would not be supporting this reference back to scrutiny at this stage, because I think that, as other members have said, and the rulings that have been benefited from the rulings from the chair, sir, is that there is a principal issue that ought to be voted on in a proper process. We are a proper parliament with proper procedures, and you should vote on the principles, which are, of course, nebulous. We have also a knowledge of Deputy Balash's amendments, which dramatically, if accepted by the Assembly, Assembly, whether or not the scrutiny panel, I know that they will review that, they will look at those, and they will look at a number of other matters. They will look at the whole thing in the round after the principles have been accepted. I don't understand, but I understand why members may be thinking that I'm not impugning any improper motives, sir, but political games or machinations are being used, sir. And I don't quite understand them. I know the Chief Minister is in a very difficult position. I welcomed his observations made about how the Council have got themselves in the positions that they have. So I don't need a scrutiny process and don't want, if I may, on my own behalf, a decision to refer to scrutiny now, because I want to vote on the principles in the full knowledge that the full and proper scrutiny process led by an able chair and a good membership of the panel is going to give 100% focus on the importance of this law. And I know, I've declared I'm a landlord, sir. I've got practical insights in both having been a minister responsible for all sorts of things in the past, and I understand the issue of the private sector rental sector and the importance of ensuring that any reforms of this tenancy law are balanced and workable. There's no doubt that reform is necessary. The current law contains gaps, lacunae. They expose tenants to risks that are unacceptable in a modern housing system. I agree with the Minister on that. But it is also the case that experience shows, sir, that poorly constructed reforms can unintended and have unintended consequences. But maybe, which is what I was trying to do, is ask what the intended red lines of the Minister is, because clearly there is something that has gone on. There's been a healthy debate at the Council of Ministers. I see one Minister nodding at me when I ask about what are these red lines that Ministers seem to be actually seizing, meaning that they can't have collective responsibility. I urge the scrutiny panel to, whatever the outcome of this debate, which I know they would, but I want to put it on record, to carefully and forensically, sir, examine the draft law and whether or not it will exacerbate Jersey's already fragile rental market. Members will recall that the Assembly has itself made decisions that have constrained housing supply, which one minister referred to in the debate prior to this, referring to scrutiny, saying he wasn't going to vote in favour of the principles. He was right to focus on the Assembly in which he was a member, but I wasn't, but other members were, of the absolutely unbelievable situation that the Bridging Island plan failed, notwithstanding the latest statistics, to put in place the right amount of land for family homes. 3-bedroom homes, one in my parish.
Deputy, the debate is on whether this could go to scrutiny or not.
I want it to go to scrutiny, and I want them to cover these issues. I want them to consider the legislation before us in the round, and I ask that the panel consider how this legislative proposal will... Am I allowed to do this, sir? Ask them.
Well, your submission must be tailored to whether, on this occasion, at this moment, there should be a reference to scrutiny in accordance with the proposition of Deputy Gardner. A more general statement.
Fair enough, sir. I understand the frustration. So I would suggest that it is not necessary that we vote in favour of a reference to scrutiny now, because we should indicate in a proper way our approval to the principles, and some members haven't had a chance to make observations which are helpful to the panel to take account of the principles, which is why I'm trying to weave a way into getting the things that I want to say in, but in a proper way, sir, in responding to a proposition that I do not think that it is right. I think it is unseemly situation that we refer something back at the point at which we haven't agreed the principles. I think that sends the uncertainty out to the market and all those landlords and those tenants who are then in a position that they're not quite sure whether or not the Assembly is going to deal with the issues that many of them are telling us that they do, and I've got no doubt that there are there. But also, I would suggest that it is better to have a proper scrutiny after a proper debate and a fulsome debate on the principles, which can also urge references to the issues that need to be dealt with, perhaps not only in this legislation, but with the panel having an oversight of the overall housing and planning issues, the issues that the fiscal policy panel has set out, all the other issues, budget amendments, the stamp duty, 3%, the house pricing index, the fact that share transfers can't be seen, rentals or purchases, and that means that landlords you can't actually know how many landlords there actually are because the share transfer don't go before the Royal Court.
Deputy, I'm not sure this is focused on whether we're going to scrutinise
I don't
or not.
think that there should be a reference back. I think there are important issues
Could
that
members
should be
please
debated.
stop talking in the background and let the Deputy finish?
So I think I'll conclude by saying I think that there absolutely should be a proper debate on the principles that we haven't concluded. We were nearly there. We should not vote in favour of this reference back to reference to scrutiny at this point, because the Assembly should give its clear indication and vote on the principles or otherwise. And I can't honestly understand for the life of me why we should basically refer it to scrutiny at this stage. But members need to be clear with the public and their constituents who they're representing.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, I close this debate and call upon Deputy Gardner to respond.
Very quickly, from all contributions, it's very clear the Minister didn't speak to Minister. There are other scrutiny panels who were not involved, and the principles connected to the articles. And the most important for me, that the scrutiny work will not be lost if this been lost. Scrutiny worked very hard, and the debate could be on the 6th or 7th of September all together. So I'm not sure who is playing which political games, so each member can make a decision. I'll call to them.
Very much. You call for the appel. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats if they're out of the chamber. The vote is on whether the matter is suspended forthwith for reference to scrutiny. And I ask members to cast their vote. Sorry, the greffier to open the voting and members to cast their vote. Probably don't vote until the greffier has opened the voting. That will probably not be good. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 23 votes pour, 22 votes contre, no abstentions.
Propose the adjournment.
The adjournment is proposed. The Assembly stands. The names, of course you can. Yes, I'm sorry.
Those members voting pour, the Conotaba St Brelard, St Peter, St Juan and St Mary, and Deputies Labby, Luce, Doublé, Morel, Lehegara, Ayer, Gardner, Gorst, War, Miles, Scott, Rose Binet, Howe, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Andrews. And those members voting contre, the Conotaba St Helier, Trinity, St Martin, St John, Grouville and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Rob Ward, Farnham, Mesick, Osoph, Coles, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Jearn, Miller, Stevenson, Torre, Moore and Alves.
This matter is now referred to scrutiny, and we will proceed with the next item of business after the adjournment. The Assembly stands adjourned until 2:15.